Every single day of Arthur's childhood was a lesson in pain, delivered with brutal force by his own father. Trust me, you and I are about to see just how twisted a father's love can get. This beast wanted a heartless heir to rule their noble house. But through all the pain, the boy never once fought back. He'd even smile while walking home with his dear Alina, until the day he arrived and found her lying there unconscious. His father. That massive beast of a man, built like an iron fortress, had just finished teaching the poor girl a lesson. Arthur finally snapped. That night, he beat his father so savagely the man fell into a deep coma. With the healers unsure if he'd ever wake, the boy was thrown into the Iron Gate Citadel. Initially, he was a total laughingstock. Arthur needed gold because he'd promised Alina they would start a life together in the capital. So he shoveled filth, warmed up boots, and even became the cell master's obedient little lapdog. He even became a human target just for a few coins. But luck failed him, and his payment fell straight into the latrine. The master ordered him to retrieve it with his mouth, and he did. He just wanted these 3 years to finally be over. Even when a dangerous new prisoner arrived, he kept his head down and avoided getting involved. Now pay attention, because this is where Arthur's world completely falls apart. A runaway royal carriage took Alina's life right before she was supposed to visit him. This news completely shattered the boy's mind. He spent hours in his cell staring at Alina's photo, until the bullies snatched it away to mock him. He ignored their insults at first, but when they joked about what they'd have done to Alina if she were still alive, he finally went insane. He slammed the leader's head against the stone so hard, it caused a 7.1 magnitude tremor. The game was over. From now on, he'd show no mercy to anyone. He had no reason left to hold back. His only reason for living was gone. When the guards burst into the room, they were met with absolute horror. Only Arthur was left standing, and the room was painted in deep, dark crimson. If the new prisoner hadn't stopped him right then, the gallows would have been the least of his worries. A week later, he was out for recreation. One of the bullies who wanted to be the new leader came to challenge him. Arthur didn't care at first. He even took a beating without fighting back once. You and I both know what happens when a man loses everything. The bully mocked Alina's death and showed a tattoo like his father's, and that's when Arthur finally snapped. And this tattooed arm, I don't think you'll be needing it anymore. Everyone was stunned by Arthur's coldness. He'd just left the dark hole, and now he was already destroying another man without a hint of remorse. Meanwhile, we see a silhouette watching from the high balcony of the prison, wondering what all the noise is about. An attendant replied that there were quite a few energetic lads down there letting off steam. While sipping his tea and looking pleased that the mysterious man was finally in good health. We then discover that this man is the warden, 𝒂𝒏𝒎𝒂𝒕𝒆, who speaks to the visitor in a very friendly tone. The silhouette belongs to a noble recently discharged from the infirmary, and the warden offers his full support. He asks the nobleman exactly what the reason for his visit to the citadel is today. All the prisoners returned to their cells, and Silas the scribe started writing in his journal again. He was clearly starting to fear Arthur, noting that he was sharing a cell with a complete and utter lunatic. He had seen what Arthur was truly capable of, and knew the cost of the boy's rage. Suddenly, a guard arrived at the bars and called Arthur's name, saying someone was here for him. He left his cell in chains, wondering who on earth would be coming to see him. His mother had abandoned him years ago, and all his noble relatives avoided him like a plague because of the situation he was in, without realizing it. Instead of the visitor's cage, the guard led him to a completely different wing, which turned out to be the warden's private office. This clearly wasn't a normal meeting, and the doubts in his mind began to boil. But as the doors opened, and he saw the mysterious man from earlier, the truth finally hit him. The man spoke with a chilling warmth, happy to see his son so full of life. Arthur just stared at his father, completely speechless. We finally see the face of his father, the legendary Lord Alaric. He bears a jagged scar across his eye and a massive dragon tattoo. The warden stands nearby, noting Arthur's total shock at the situation. And that's where we leave it. Arthur's nightmare has returned to life, healthier than ever. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. Let's dive into this twisted family feud together. Julian was frozen, unable to believe his eyes as he wondered why this was all happening. But his father interrupts his thoughts, beginning to speak words that sound like a dark confession. After decades, serving as the top knight in a ruthless shadow syndicate, the person who nearly ended his story wasn't an assassin or a rival lord. It wasn't the royal guard either, it was his own son. Garrick admits that waking up in the infirmary filled him with deep sorrow for the boy. As a father, he claimed he desperately yearned to see his boy again, swearing there was nothing in this world he wouldn't do for Julian. With tears streaming down his face, he claims he had no choice but to act. This statement leaves Julian in total confusion, struggling to understand the meaning behind this entire speech. Then, Garrick reveals that the man who ended his friend's life that day was actually him. As the story unfolds, he recounts that after the heavy carriage struck her down, Diana was still breathing, but couldn't move from the impact. She begged for help from a mysterious man watching her from the shadows. Now watch this part closely. When he saw her face, his heart went cold as stone. Even as she bled, he confronted her about words she'd spoken years ago in his estate, right before he fell into his long coma. He told the dying girl that his next move was a lesson in the sacrifices parents make. With zero empathy, he muttered that perhaps a common girl like her could never truly grasp his noble reasons. After all, she was just an orphan with no family legacy to protect. Returning to the present at the fortress, Garrick continues. With a twisted sense of pride, he says he once thought Julian was just a weak, silent, pathetic boy. But seeing Julian explode in rage for that girl proved he finally had the fire needed to act like a true noble. And because of that potential, he decided to end her life. This man returned from the brink just to commit murder, claiming it was for his son, a logic only a madman could believe in his twisted mind. The warden watches in shock as Julian suddenly snaps, lunging at his father with a desperate, heavy right hook. But before the blow can land, the dungeon guards drop him with several electric shocks. They pile on to restrain him as Julian collapses, twitching on the cold stone floor, barely clinging to his consciousness. Looking down at his broken heir, Garrick asks if he seeks revenge against his own blood. He then reveals the only way to achieve such a goal. Some of his young recruits are in this very fortress, but they are just unproven rookies with fresh marks. However, these same men are destined to become the future blades of the Crimson Dragon Order. To reach his father, Julian must become the strongest here, take command, and climb the hierarchy. He must conquer this dungeon and surpass the second in command before he can even think of challenging the Crimson Dragon Order. His reward would be a throne that even Garrick never reached. If he succeeds, his life will finally be complete. Turning to leave, he tells the warden to watch his son, and the man simply nods in agreement. Now you and I are about to see something incredible. Julian somehow finds the strength to rise despite the lightning in his body. He tells Garrick to shut his mouth because he's not waiting for the future. His revenge starts right now. He leaps at his father, but a shadow moves faster, intercepting the boy before he can strike a single blow. A massive hand pins Julian's head into the dirt, instantly stopping his advance. The guard protecting Garrick apologizes to the boy, calling him young master, but says he must follow his lord's absolute orders. Even pinned down, Julian thrashes like a wild animal, though reaching his father seems like an impossible dream right now. Garrick tells him to open his eyes and witness the reality. He is still worlds away from reaching his level. Surrounded by a small army, the man looks like an untouchable god, and Julian's fury is just useless noise. The only way to get true revenge is to take complete control of this fortress. Garrick says this with a cold smile, waiting for that day to come before turning and leaving. Julian finally stops fighting, accepting the brutal reality of his mission. As the soldiers march away, we see him alone, trembling as he pushes himself off the floor. Time passes within the grim walls, and we find ourselves in the fortress's dusty woodworking shop. Marcus hammers away at his quota, working with lightning speed to earn a few moments of precious rest. Stick with me, it's just beginning. All right, stick with me. We are about to find out if this boy really used that hammer to end his bullies once and for all. But looking at 𝒏𝒂𝒃, the inmate saw a broken soul, not a slayer. Just then, a newcomer arrived at the forge with fresh supplies. A warden ordered the man to rack the tools, and as he stepped closer to the workbench, he came face to face with 𝒏𝒂𝒃. Time seemed to stop as their eyes locked in a moment of pure, silent shock. The boy fumbled his tools, and a sharp iron spike rattled to 𝒏𝒂𝒃's feet. He froze, staring as if it sparked a memory. A new face enters the scene, a man named 𝒀𝒂𝒌𝒖��, walking right up to the supposed killer and calling his name like they were old tavern buddies from long ago. It turns out these two were actually childhood acquaintances back in their home village many years in the past. 𝒀𝒂𝒃 mentioned seeing 𝒏𝒂𝒃's face on the royal scrolls and was stunned to find him rotting in a dungeon like this. He seized the chance to ask the one question burning in his mind. Did 𝒏𝒂𝒃 really take the lives of 7 students all alone? Since 𝒏𝒂𝒃 was such a timid child, 𝒀𝒂𝒃 could not wrap his head around him becoming a cold-blooded monster. In that exact moment, 𝒏𝒂𝒃's knuckles turned white as he gripped his hammer, clearly shaken by the mention of his dark past. Luckily, a warden barked an order, telling 𝒀𝒂𝒃 to get back to his post and stop the useless chatter. Now pay attention here. This is the part where 𝒏𝒂𝒃 begins to lose his grip on reality. He had been squeezing the hammer so hard that he did not even feel the blood dripping from his trembling palm. Meanwhile, back in his stone cell, Julian sits on the cold floor, lost in his own web of schemes. He replayed his father's words, vowing to hunt down the man who dared to claim they shared the same blood. But the path was still unclear. Nearby, a cellmate groaned about the starving conditions and the miserable prison rations. He grumbled that he would die a happy man if he could just taste a single bite of roasted pheasant today. When a warden walked by, Julian seized the moment and called the officer over to the iron bars. The guard asked what the problem was, but Julian just smirked, asking if his special delivery had finally arrived yet. The warden looked confused, reminding the boy where he was, before ordering him to step out for a private word. In the next scene, the prisoner who wanted a feast is holding a whole pheasant, his impossible wish granted. After rotting away for so long, it had been ages since they tasted real food, and they hailed Julian for the miracle. Julian only managed this because the wardens feared his father's power, and he wanted to see how far that shadow reached. He was testing his true limits as the Duke's son. You and I can see he is willing to use any dark means necessary to reach his final goal of revenge. While Julian schemed, the other inmates noticed 𝒏𝒂𝒃 was not touching his food at all. He had been acting strange ever since he crossed paths with 𝒀𝒂𝒃, visibly trembling under the weight of his fear. The next morning, both men returned to the forge to begin their long day of labor at the workbenches. 𝒀𝒂𝒃, carrying another load of supplies, dropped them again as if he were playing a cruel, deliberate game. He scattered sharp iron spikes right at 𝒏𝒂𝒃's feet, clearly trying to provoke a reaction from the boy. He offered a fake apology with a twisted smile, while his gang of thugs watched from the shadows, mocking him. 𝒀𝒂𝒃 had been bragging to his crew that the infamous 7-student slayer was actually his pathetic servant once. But seeing the tension between them, the other prisoners started to wonder if 𝒀𝒂𝒃 was just full of lies. To prove his dominance, 𝒀𝒂𝒃 told them that 𝒏𝒂𝒃 had been groveling at his feet since they were toddlers. He asked if 𝒏𝒂𝒃 missed their old games, walking over and grabbing him roughly by the hair. He slammed 𝒏𝒂𝒃's face down toward a spike on the bench, triggering a horrific memory from their childhood village. 𝒀𝒂𝒃 used to torment 𝒏𝒂𝒃 daily just for sport. We see a flashback of 𝒏𝒂𝒃 trapped behind a heavy door. 𝒀𝒂𝒃 laughed as he hammered long nails through the wood, inches from the boy's face, just to hear him scream. Back at the workbench, 𝒏𝒂𝒃 is shaking with terror, a rusty spike now hovering dangerously close to his left eye as history repeats itself. Just before Julian goes to find his companion, a strange rumor begins to spread through the dungeon halls. And that is where we leave it. Trust me, you and I are going to want to see what happens next. All right, you and I are about to dive into one of the most intense dungeon showdowns ever recorded. Julian stands up, asking the other prisoners if they really plan to clean the workshop at this hour. His cellmates look up, hoping he is about to order another feast like those meat pies from last time. But Julian simply demands that the jailer unlock the heavy iron door for him right now. Back in the workshop, two of Jeffrey's thugs are already lying unconscious on the stone floor after the clash. The biggest brute in the gang asks Julian if his name is really Julian, proving he has heard of the hero's deadly reputation within this fortress. Jeffrey cuts in before he can answer, saying the whole situation is finally starting to make sense. He asks if Julian and Magnus are truly brothers in arms. He admits he is jealous that someone as weak as Magnus has such a powerful knight protecting him. One thug grins while readying a heavy punch, asking Julian if he would rather join their noble house and be their friend. Julian uses his momentum to lunge forward, moving like a blur toward his enemy. He grabs the man's tunic and executes a perfect leg sweep, bringing the giant down with his own weight and force. He slams the brute's head into the dirt, snarling that he would rather rot than be friends with scum like him. After finishing off the third man, Julian turns to Jeffrey and calls him a pathetic golden-haired coward. He asks why Jeffrey pushed Magnus so far, but the villain just asks if Julian is mocking him. Now pay attention here. Jeffrey starts talking just to distract Julian from the deadly threat rising up behind him. But while he talks, his other ally, the fallen giant, rises silently behind Julian, preparing a deadly chokehold while Julian realizes it was all a ruse to trap him. The brute wraps his thick arm around Julian's neck, squeezing the life out of him with no way to escape. In pure desperation, Julian prepares to snap the man's fingers, but Jeffrey plunges a dagger into his side, making it impossible for our hero to breathe from the pain. Right at that moment, Magnus bursts out from an old storage chest, begging the brute to let go before Julian's neck snaps from the pressure. Magnus is not empty-handed. He uses a heavy iron chain to strangle the giant and pull him backward. Jeffrey is stunned, wondering how he escaped the chest until he remembers the lock was shattered earlier during the brawl. The giant tries to fight against the crushing force of the iron links with his bare hands. You and I both know that is a mistake. Magnus warns that struggling will only break his neck faster while pressing his boot down. He presses his boot against the man's skull, telling him that his death is inevitable if he keeps fighting back. Ignoring the warning, the giant struggles until he finally loses consciousness and collapses onto the hard workshop floor. Magnus stalks toward a panicking Jeffrey, who starts crying about being the real victim as he backs away in fear. As Magnus gets closer, the coward Jeffrey trips over his own feet and falls flat on his back. He quickly crawls onto his knees, weeping and begging for mercy from the man he once betrayed. He clings to Magnus's boots, admitting he is just a born idiot, exactly like everyone always said he was back then. But Magnus surprises him by saying he never actually hated him, even after Jeffrey ruined his entire life. He explains that spilling blood now will not change the tragedy that happened in their past. He admits he considered revenge, but looking at him now, he realizes they were once brothers at heart since they were friends once. Jeffrey thinks he is safe, but then, boom, Julian delivers a crushing kick straight to the side of his head. The force of the blow sends the golden-haired coward flying 10 feet across the stone room. Clutching his bleeding stomach, Julian growls that the debt from the dagger has finally been settled in full. Later on, back in the castle barracks, Julian looks at Magnus and asks if he is actually a complete idiot for letting that snake Jeffrey live. Magnus is confused by the insult, so Julian explains exactly what he means by that. How can a warrior who killed 7 men be afraid of a coward like Jeffrey? Magnus tries to explain, but Julian understands him now. Even if Julian did not fully understand the history between them, He realizes that Magnus truly considers him a brother. Magnus just smiles and nods. And that is where we leave it. A story of loyalty forged in the fires of the kingdom's darkest dungeons. All right, stick with me. Julian is about to find his very first ally in this hellhole. But the moment is cut short as a shadow creeps toward Nate's broken body, whispering something chilling. He demands to know why Nate left his cell, rambling about a single cockroach he found inside. Furious he had to face the bug alone, the man snaps, raining down blows on Nate's face with pure, unhinged madness. Blood sprays everywhere, but this freak only cares about the filth and germs staining his skin. He casually grabs Julian's shirt and wipes the mess away. With blood still smeared across his terrifying face, he asks if he finally looks clean enough for him. Julian stays silent. This psycho is clearly off his rocker, but Julian isn't flinching for a second. He bluntly tells the man he looks absolutely filthy, which sends the freak into a total rage. A guard interrupts before blood is spilled, barking orders for everyone to finish up and head back to their cells. As he leaves, the psycho obsessively whispers Julian's number, 7199. He is burning that number into his brain. By morning, the entire yard is buzzing, with every inmate surrounding Julian. Julian demands to know why they are crowding him, so Nate steps up to explain the situation. Rumors of Julian's insane strength have spread like wildfire, making him the perfect shield against the other dungeon gangs. Julian says he doesn't mind them hanging around for now. But he warns them not to be a distraction. His only goal is tracking down the criminals bearing the scarlet wyvern tattoo. Nate asks what exactly he is searching for. Julian says he is looking for something specific, and Nate, the king of prison intel, instantly offers to help find it. Now pay attention. The hunt for that specific, disgusting tattoo starts right here. Later that day, everyone gathers in the common room to hear the town crier's updates on the ruthless bandit gangs. These syndicates are getting out of control, extorting gold and treasures from every village across the border. Julian's crew discusses the chaos until he scoffs in disgust, cursing every single one of those low-life criminals. He thinks they all deserve to rot in the deepest dungeon, which makes his own gang pretty nervous. Nate tries to defend the inmates, claiming not everyone here is a monster before sharing his own tragic story. He tells them about a legendary tavern back home called the Golden Hearth. Nate was a regular there, obsessed with the high-quality ale and meat they served every night. But one day, a spoiled brat, the son of a powerful high chancellor, showed up to cause trouble. They started trashing the tavern just for fun, mocking the owner and the food, until someone finally stepped in. Nate stood his ground against the whole gang, ready to defend his favorite spot at any cost. Calling himself the ultimate champion of the hearth, he single-handedly fought the entire gang, leaving them in a heap. But because of the Chancellor's influence, Nate was the one thrown into this hellish dungeon instead. Nate finishes his epic tale with massive pride, but a cellmate just laughs, calling Nate the biggest liar in prison. Nobody buys the story for a second, no matter how much Nate swears it is true. You and I both know Julian is smarter than that. He just fakes belief to win Nate's loyalty. Nate's ego goes through the roof, convinced that Julian wants him as his future right-hand man and trusted commander. Totally deluded, he chuckles to himself while working out in the prison's small garden patch. As Nate absent-mindedly swings his heavy gardening hoe, he accidentally sprays a clump of wet dirt right onto a passing prisoner's face and instantly freezes. It is the same psycho from before, the one who hates germs. Julian's words about him being filthy start ringing in his ears. The insult from earlier triggers a violent meltdown, and we find out this lunatic actually used to be Nate's former leader. Nate starts stammering apologies, swearing he did not see the man standing there. But the man just seethes, asking Nate exactly how he plans to clean this disgusting mess. Shaking in terror, Nate promises to fix it, realizing this guy's obsession with being clean is pure madness. The psycho pulls a bottle of concentrated poison from his coat and sprays it directly into Nate's eyes. And that is where we leave it. Nate is screaming in agony as everything goes dark. All right, stick with me. We are diving into a story where Nathan claims he sought out Julian entirely on his own. The man recites Julian's prisoner mark, 7199, hunting for the boy sharing a dungeon cell with Norman. Norman realizes that is Julian's mark, while the lunatic explains his target had the nerve to call him a filthy animal. Visibly shaken, the madman insists he works hard to stay pure, demanding they go together to hunt down Julian immediately. As he rants, Norman spots a mark on the man's side, the same crimson dragon sigil Julian has been desperately searching for. Meanwhile, we see Julian training in his cell, still frustrated after failing to find any leads on the mark. Julian powers through one-armed push-ups, his entire mind locked onto tracking down anyone bearing that cursed dragon tattoo. Suddenly, Norman appears, breaking Julian's focus and trying to start a conversation while he is still mid-workout. Before Julian can speak, Norman suspiciously offers him a drink. Julian takes it, but his instincts tell him something is off. Now pay attention here. Julian asks him where he got the poisonous tonic. We flash back to Norman's dark past, where he is holding a captive while forcing a funnel into his mouth. His former leader, that same lunatic, screams in a frenzy that the captive's foul words had somehow made him dirty. Gripping a bottle of acid, the madman prepares to pour it down the funnel, claiming he is just cleaning the man out. The prisoner passes out instantly. Instead of helping, the madman panics over the mess on the floor, showing just how far gone he truly is. Norman's old dungeon was a literal hell ruled by a demon. Now, Julian keeps questioning Norman about the deadly poison. Norman tries lying again, but his cellmates already know he is a total fraud. They get suspicious and press for answers. Norman starts to sweat, realizing that poisoning the leader will bring serious trouble. But then, get this. Julian grabs the drink and downs it, casually saying it was delicious while thanking a stunned Norman. He then announces a group cleaning for tomorrow, telling everyone to get ready while completely ignoring the poisoned drink. For Julian, this was just a simple test to see if Norman actually had the guts to go through with it. Later that night, Julian sits alone, sketching the dragon sigil he is hunting into his personal notebook. Norman seizes the chance to approach, asking Julian exactly what he is drawing. Julian explains his mission, while Norman quietly plots a way to poison him for real without getting caught this time. After finishing his story, Julian asks if Norman has any questions. Norman just stares and asks why Julian would ever trust a man like him. He warns Julian to doubt people, because trusting others so recklessly in this kingdom will only lead to disaster. Suddenly, Norman regrets his honesty, wondering why he could not control his own tongue around this man. Julian calmly replies that a man clever enough to deceive is a great asset, and would not be stupid enough to become his enemy with such pathetic lies. Julian stands up, telling Norman he is dousing the lights because it is time for the dungeon to go silent. The next day, 2 sentries discuss a surprise inspection coming from the Royal Council's high officials. They order every prisoner to scrub the halls until they shine before the lords arrive. Prisoners fill the corridors with brooms, desperately cleaning every inch of their damp stone cells. Soon, Norman's old master corners him, demanding he finally finish Julian off with the corrosive acid. The madman asks if Norman is backing out with a terrifying look, but Norman just lies, saying Julian felt guilty about the whole thing. He tries to spin more tales, but the lunatic knows Norman's reputation and is not buying a single word of it. He decides to punish the lie by burying a heavy fist into Norman's stomach. The man has completely snapped. He screams Julian's prisoner mark, 7199, vowing he will never forgive the boy while assaulting Norman. He shoves Norman's head into the waste basin, crushing him with his boot, determined to cleanse them both personally. He cracks open the acid and flushes the basin, attempting to drown Norman right then and there. Just as Norman starts to fade, Julian arrives to confront the lunatic, who goes berserk when Julian calls him a filthy, disgusting rat. Half-drowned and gasping for air, Norman looks up at his leader with a weak gaze. "Trust me, you will want to see this." He asks why it took Julian so long to spring the trap. "Stick with me. You and I are about to see a dungeon brawl turn into a total nightmare." Nathan was a man of honor, refusing to betray his friend despite the heavy threats against his life. He emptied the vial of venom and tossed it, knowing the consequences of his defiance would come eventually. He also revealed that the man who threatened him bears the same dragon mark Julian has been hunting down. Back in the present, as the tension in the lavatory peaks, Julian wipes filth onto his hand and smears it on the madman's clean armor, instantly triggering him. The lunatic begins screaming lethal threats at Julian. But Julian ignores the noise, grabbing the brute and slamming him into the stone floor. Julian demands to know if he threatened his friend, promising to end him right then and there. Seeing that dragon crest, Julian feels a sick joy since he finally has a reason to break this man. The records show he was once a rising star of the arena, famous for a crushing abdominal grip that squeezed the life out of every single opponent. The secret was trapping the opponent's hands, so they couldn't even tap out while their bones snapped. But he stopped using that move after a fighter vomited all over him during a clinch in the ring. This dirty fighter had one fatal flaw beneath his tough exterior. Silas is a total germaphobe. He literally fears the slightest bit of filth or castle grime. Back in the fight, Julian continues to pressure his opponent for information about the Crimson Dragon. Now pay attention, because while Julian is ready for war, the madman is busy screaming about the germs on the floor rotting his skin away in this filth. The lunatic spits out Julian's captive number, swearing he is going to murder him. Julian just laughs, telling him he clearly does not understand the situation. He dips his hand in the muck and tries to shove it right into the fighter's mouth with force. We see a flashback of a younger Silas, already obsessed with being perfectly clean and complaining about his sweat. He opens his locker, desperate for a clean wash, but finds a disgusting nightmare waiting for him instead. Someone had filled it with rotting garbage, and behind him stood the rival he had previously humiliated in the ring. That rival came for blood, sick of being the laughingstock of the entire kingdom after their last fight. He grabs a piece of trash and tries to force-feed it to Silas, calling him human waste. You and I both saw that coming. Poking a germaphobe is a recipe for a complete and total disaster. Anyone who leaves this man dirty is bound to suffer the most brutal fate. Silas flips the script, pinning Julian to the floor with pure, murderous rage burning in his eyes. He tightens his grip, promising to crush Julian's internal organs until there is nothing left. Julian's mind drifts to his childhood, remembering a father who never once offered a warm hug. No, his father only held him, and he was breaking his bones in a fit of violent rage. That trauma fuels him. Julian snaps back, grabs the man's hands, and flips him back onto the ground. Julian takes control, mocking the man by saying he is used to crawling in the dungeon dirt. He hammers the brute's ribs, and then begins twisting his arms with bone-shattering force and zero mercy. Julian asks a simple question: should he snap his arms or his spine first? The madman actually begs for mercy, leaving Julian stunned because he has never seen anyone quit so easily. When it is over, the madman is bound and gagged with a funnel shoved into his mouth. Nathan notes the guy is still resisting, wondering how someone so like them could be so difficult to break. With their strategy failing, Nathan suggests they have no choice but to relieve themselves into the funnel. Julian is shocked by the suggestion. As Silas thrashes, Nathan starts pouring tart lemon juice down the funnel to break his spirit. Julian wonders aloud what it would taste like, which finally makes the madman stop his useless resistance. Julian asks again, "Tell me everything you know about the Crimson Dragon." The madman starts talking, remembering the mysterious woman who gave him that mark on his skin years ago. "And trust me, you and I just witnessed the start of a massive conspiracy involving the Crimson Dragon. All right, you and I are about to dive into a dark tale where blood and dragon crests hide the truth about strength and life itself." She told him the order sought out fresh seeds, young warriors with the fire to lead the next era. But even the most radiant blossom is destined to wither and rot in the dirt eventually. These squires possessed a raw potential that older knights had long since lost. Shaped by hardship, they could grow into monsters, and the order intended to harvest them in their private garden. Those who survived bloomed with the deadly grace of the silver dragon. As he recalls their recruitment tactics, we cut back to the brutal interrogation in the dungeon. The prisoner whimpers that he is just a low-tier grunt with no real intel, begging for his life. Arthur realizes his own father forced him into this violent world, just to accelerate his growth into a weapon. Breaking his train of thought, the lunatic asks why Arthur is so obsessed with the order anyway. He even mocks Arthur by offering a personal recommendation to join their ranks, which immediately triggers Arthur's rage. Arthur lunges, seizing the man by the throat as the prisoner's eyes widen in sheer terror. He starts to panic. Now pay attention here, because Arthur isn't looking for talk, he is looking for blood, and he chokes the man into silence. Consumed by fury, he delivers a bone-shattering punch directly to the man's face, ending the conversation for good. Later, we find the Khans cleaning the floors again, while Arthur complains about a stubborn stain on the stone. He looks for some acid, but Cedric appears, holding a bottle and offering it, making Arthur wonder if his companion has finally snapped. Cedric brushes it off, and Arthur sighs, relieved that with Thorn gone, he can finally sleep with one eye shut. Arthur reminds him that Thorn is still breathing, and asks how Cedric actually survived that acid torture in his old cell. Most people who are forced to swallow alchemical acid don't exactly live to tell the tale, after all. Cedric explains that anyone else would have been foaming at the mouth and dying on the spot. But when his former captain attacked, Cedric had already swapped the acid for harmless soapy water in a clever move. He admits it was a total fabrication to trick the guards into granting a cell transfer, having planned everything from the start. He still remembers the captain's terrifying rage when the deception was finally revealed. Arthur doesn't care for thanks. You and I both know Arthur has a bigger goal, hunting down every man with that dragon mark. Cedric wonders why on earth Arthur is hunting such a legendary and dangerous guild. Arthur's goal is simple: kill every last one of them. He's already crossed 2 names off his list. Cedric mentions that many men in this dungeon carry that same mark. They start piecing the clues together, looking for a pattern among these marked men. It hits them. Every single member they have fought so far was a cell leader. Arthur hears about the High Council meeting in a few days and realizes he finally has a lead. Every few months, the leaders gather to forge alliances and secure their power. On paper, the prison staff sees it as a sanctioned social event. In reality, it is a criminal summit where illegal deals are struck and power is traded like gold. Cedric warns him to be careful, as he'll be walking straight into a room full of enemies. He reminds Arthur that the most ruthless young criminals in the kingdom are all locked up here. Among them is one legendary beast more dangerous than all the rest. He tells Arthur to keep a low profile to avoid catching that monster's eye. As the warning fades, a heavy shovel is placed by the entrance of the meeting hall. The day of the High Council arrives, and the room fills with the elite members of the Silver Dragon. They discuss their fallen brothers, knowing Arthur is the one tearing their ranks apart. New faces appear one by one, until a heavy door suddenly swings open to interrupt them. Trust me, you and I are about to watch someone grab that shovel and start a real massacre. Julian asks if finding the noble house captains was really this simple. Snapping a pickaxe with his bare hands, he growls about the massive trouble he took to find them, ready for blood. Bridge at night, Bridge One. Let's see if Julian can survive these dungeon lords. He scans the room, mocking a young knight, asking why a weakling is even here. He levels the splintered wood at the man's throat. Flash back to the iron yard, where we see prisoners like Julian slaving away with their pickaxes. Seconds before the High Council meets. They talk while working, Galahad asks Marcos to give their leader some encouragement, though Marcos has no clue what this council is for. Julian explains it is a secret gathering for the worst criminals, sanctioned directly by the High Inquisitor himself. It is a den for backroom deals and trading forbidden secrets. Marcos gives the most generic good luck possible to satisfy Galahad's annoying request. This ticks Galahad off. He adds, "Stay safe" first, showing a rare moment of brotherhood between these three outcasts. Galahad warns Julian again not to cause a scene in the council room, since there is absolutely no way out. Bridge at night, Bridge 2. Now watch closely. Back at the council, Julian lunges forward. Julian stares down the night, threatening to shove the splintered wood through his windpipe. He vows to wipe out every single initiate of this corrupt order. His target does not even flinch, choosing not to fight back even with his own life on the line. Julian demands a real fight, but the man just smiles and thanks him, showing zero fear of death. Confused, Julian listens as the man explains that a house captain can use force to maintain order. He tells Julian he is using that rule as an excuse, but he has missed the most vital point. He explains that in Julian's recent duels against the three fallen captains, he had a righteous cause, something the High Order refers to as the law of justification. The man calmly notes that fighting Julian now, with zero reason or reward, is simply not worth the effort to respond. However, if he continues to disrupt the dungeon's peace, the other surrounding captains won't let him leave the room alive. Bridge at night, Bridge 3. I know what you're thinking, is he really going to do it? The man smiles, asking if Julian still wants to strike. Even if it was a gamble, confirming the information he had heard felt like the right move for now. The man stands, hands in pockets, asking if Julian is done with this pathetic little act. He speaks as if he has been inside Julian's mind, knowing every single step of the plan. Turning away, he deduces that Julian is clearly a direct enemy of the House of the Dragon. He mocks Julian, calling him pathetic for not knowing his place in the hierarchy. With Julian's tense arrival over, the council officially begins as an announcer notes the missing leaders. He mentions the three warriors Julian recently hospitalized, now too broken to attend. A member of the order, clutching a holy rosary, mourns the state of their fallen brothers. The announcer continues, declaring the cause of this chaos is Julian, who is now formally introduced as the new Lord of Chamber 36. Everyone whispers about the rumors, wondering which noble house this boy actually serves. Julian realizes there are 15 captains here, and at a glance, none bear the dragon crest except for one man. As the new lord, a boy with glasses asks if Julian has anything to say. He thinks for a moment, then simply asks if being a house captain is even that special. The boy says he looks forward to Julian's reign, though he's clearly already made everyone uncomfortable. Moving to the second topic, they discuss the illegal shops run by the captains inside these walls. A portion of these profits must go directly to the High Inquisitor. But someone in this room has failed to pay their tribute for this season. It is Lord Park's gambling hall, but the rogue quickly apologizes, promising to deliver the gold by sunset. Speaking of which, another captain mentions a dark rumor spreading through the dungeon. The rumor claims that the high-stakes games in the hall, built on honor, are actually a total sham. Bridge at night, Bridge 4. Well, secrets never stay buried for long. Lord Park denies it, well aware of the price for being caught. All right, you and I are about to dive into a dark kingdom where the Lord swears that if he is caught cheating, anyone can take his life. The council moved on to smuggling roots and the blackwood spices, but over in the workshop, a desperate voice started pleading for some mercy. He begged them to stop, crying out that he had already lost everything. The poor guy was absolutely broken, drowning in pure despair. Young Benedict had been gambling his life away, only to lose everything to a knight with the worst hand imaginable. One more round would mean utter ruin, but that is just how life goes inside the kingdom's most dangerous betting den. This place doubles as a training workshop for the guild, where Master Jackson greets fresh faces by promising games that are easier than any tavern dice match. With every table offering a new way to lose gold, he pushes the dice game first, promising it is all just good fun. One nervous merchant behind him asks if it is really that simple, wondering if he should risk just one single round. Thinking that waiting would only spoil the thrill, Lord Alaric reminded them that anyone coming for his head without a damn good reason would be the one buried. However, that also meant that if the tables were turned, and someone actually had proof of foul play, everything would change. Now watch closely, because Silas is about to take a massive gamble that could get him killed. He shatters the die, ready to take control. Jackson starts to panic, but Silas just points to the floor because hidden inside that broken die was a tiny lodestone. Hard proof that the den was rigged. See, the King's Reformatory is meant to be a place for training young knights under strict supervision. At least, that is the lie everyone outside believes. Warden Thorne, the 26th master of the Reformatory, used his position to transform the entire castle into a wretched den of organized crime. Deep inside the dungeon walls, the elite prisoners run illegal markets they call stores, generating massive piles of gold for their bosses. Naturally, a massive cut of that gold goes straight to the warden. And in exchange, the prison leaders get luxuries and freedoms that regular inmates could only ever dream of having in a cell. No one would ever suspect that a full-blown criminal guild was operating right inside a royal correctional facility like this. But this is one of those shops called the betting den, ruled by Lord Alaric himself. Inside, a man feels his pulse racing as he realizes his gold is completely gone. Driven by pure desperation, the young man thinks one more round is his only chance to win everything back from the pit. Suddenly, Lord Alaric appears with a sinister solution. He offers to lend the boy the gold he needs, as long as he signs a contract as collateral. At first, the young man tells the boss to rot in hell and stay away from his business for good. But the addiction is too strong. He accepts the deal, only wondering why the Lord had not offered him the gold sooner. Returning to the present, Silas has just called out the fact that there was a hidden magnet inside their dice. If he is right, it is the smoking gun that proves this entire casino is nothing but a massive, lying fraud. Jackson starts sweating bullets as Captain Vance steps forward, picking up the broken dice and telling the entire room that the results are being manipulated. The room explodes into chaos as the gamblers start demanding answers. I know what you're thinking. He caught them, right? Well, Silas asks if he's wrong, proving the assistant uses a magnet to pick the winning number. However, Jackson keeps his cool, looking the boy in the eye and telling him he is dead wrong about everything. He calmly explains that the metal ball inside isn't a magnet. It is just there to stabilize the die's center of gravity. It is just a weight, he claims, and then pulls out a real magnet to let Silas test his theory right there. If the dice really was magnetic, it would not have just fallen to the floor like that, but instead, it would have stuck tight like the other metal tools he showed. Suddenly, the crowd turns on Silas, laughing at his failed attempt. Then, with a predatory grin, Jackson simply offers the boy one more round to win his pride and gold back. And Lord Alaric, watching from the shadows, starts taking a very keen interest in this new player trying to expose his empire. A few minutes later, Jackson mocks him, saying the game was surprisingly fast considering how much the boy talked earlier. As Silas had officially lost everything. Silas is completely stunned, certain that he had a 50% chance of winning. Now, he's left wondering if he is just cursed with terrible luck. Jackson asks if the boy has any gold left, but Silas just throws down another one of his few belongings, ignoring the fact that it is only paper. Suddenly, another man screams that this whole game is nothing but a massive sham. Brandishing a sharp tool, he threatens the guards, shouting that he is not an idiot who can be fooled so easily. The Lord steps in while the man keeps screaming for his lost gold. Alaric grabs his hand, mockingly reminding him how much he enjoyed winning those first few rounds. And that's it. Trust me, You and I are going to want to see what happens when the Lord finally loses his cool. All right, you and I are about to dive into a world where a single card could cost you everything. But with zero evidence, Silas warns that disrupting the nobility will have severe consequences for everyone and his other patrons. The guard fakes an apology for his rough grip, claiming it was just for safety reasons. With a smug grin, he tells everyone to continue playing. This has the other losers mocking Julian, calling anyone who doubts the house a total idiot. After all, if you lose, just get better. Later, in a secret location, the main crew gathers together and Nigel asks how Julian fared. Unfortunately, our hero admits that every single gold coin is now completely gone. He found zero proof, but he looks to his crew and they reach deep into their coats to show him something. Nigel reveals that they stole 2 cards, exactly as they had planned together. Now pay attention here. This is where Julian's real plan finally comes to light. Because of that scandal, they managed to swipe the cards from the other table with zero trouble at all. Nigel is beaming with pride over his scheme, while Julian just feels like a massive embarrassment. If these cards are marked, they will finally have their proof. Even before checking, Julian is absolutely certain there is something dark. Moments later, at the industrial carriage works, the screech of iron wheels echoes through the yard. Trapped beneath a heavy carriage, a young boy begs for mercy for his tiny mistake. Silas Thorne grabs him by the hair, demanding to know if he still thinks the den is rigged. People like him spread rumors. The boy's screams fill the air as the gangster shoves him toward the line. After the punishment ends, someone arrives to speak with the leader of the syndicate. The guard apologizes, reporting that a client named Julian caused a massive scene at the tables. Surprisingly, Silas tells him not to worry. He claims it wasn't the boy's fault at all. Instead, he tells the boy to keep working. Silas suspects Julian has a hidden motive for showing such deep hostility toward his powerful organization. He doesn't fear a direct attack, but protecting the casino's well-being is his only real priority. One look at his face tells you he'll take lethal measures if he is disturbed again. Back at the safe house, Nigel excitedly announces that he has finally discovered the secret. While the others see nothing, he sees the truth hidden right on the back of the card he swiped. Looking closely at the pattern, he spots 2 circles that are clearly different sizes. You and I both know what this means. The game is officially on, and Julian has finally found his proof. However, back at the workshop, Silas Thorne was already plotting a way to turn Julian's next move into a lethal trap on a normal day. At the Blackwood Reformatory, inmate 2658, Arthur, is finally set free. As he walks out, a mysterious man he doesn't know yet is waiting there to congratulate him. He offers bread to celebrate, asking if the boy enjoyed his time gambling behind bars. Then, the man laughs at him. When Arthur tries to play innocent and act like he did nothing wrong, the man shoves bread down his throat. Arthur was once a desperate gambling addict who took a loan from the boss with a guarantee. That dark guarantee was now a signed contract for his own organs, held firmly by the brute in front of him. At 1.74 meters and weighing 64 kilograms, the boy was a prime specimen for the market. With type O blood, they had been waiting for him to be released for a long time. Arthur tries to fight back, but he is roughly tossed into the back of a dark carriage. Hours later, the criminals laugh about how fresh these young organs are for their growing and very profitable business. Business is booming, and the lead thug even got new teeth thanks to his partner, Silas Thorne, the cold trafficking agent. But the gangster asks how long they can keep this dark trade going before someone finally catches them. One slip-up, and someone might finally catch him. The director is slippery, so the blame will fall on Silas. Trust me, you and I are about to find out if enough gold and silver can really buy his way out of this hell. All right, stick with me. You and I are about to watch Julian Vance spot a tiny, game-changing clue. Barnaby turns to Merrick and asks if he also finds Julian incredible, since even he is impressed by how legendary their investigator is. Either way, our hero finally has the ultimate weapon to cut down every one of his enemies. He makes it clear that they are heading to the gambling den tonight to finish their business once and for all. Moments later, Julian strides back into the iron workshop with his head held high like a noble knight. Gideon is shocked to see him back, having no clue about the secret plan. Approaching the table, Julian asks if this is where they play for high stakes, then sits down in front of everyone to expose how the house is cheating. However, just as he prepares to spring his trap on the unsuspecting house. Look closely here. Lord Donovan suddenly appears and offers to play a round, which makes absolutely no sense to anyone watching. Lord Donovan mentions he is dying to know why Julian is so obsessed with finding the royal dragon sigil. Julian obviously refuses to share his personal secrets with a man like that. Then, the master of the forge asks if the boy will change his mind if he wins. Knowing it makes no difference, Julian finally agrees to the bet. A massive crowd gathers as the master of the house gets personally involved in a round. Since this is such a rare event, the boss kindly lets our hero choose the game. Because Julian had already struggled with the dice, he decides to choose the card game instead. However, Gideon suggests a game where novices can excel, like a memory test where you flip over matching cards. If a player gets the same number, they continue. But if they make a single mistake, the turn will pass to their opponent. The key is to remember the positions of the cards, but since he knows about the marks, he should be fine. Julian believes there is no way for him to lose. However, without knowing about those hidden marks, he would be completely lost. Then, they announce the big match between Lord Donovan, master of the pit, and the leader of Cell 36. However, from a distance, Barnaby asks his friend if he is seeing the table correctly. Now pay attention, because Julian just realized something absolutely terrifying. Every single mark on those cards has completely disappeared. Barnaby asks if the marks are just so small that they cannot see them from where they are standing. However, Merrick knows the bitter truth. These cards have not been marked at all. Sensing the trap, Lord Donovan lets out a mocking chuckle, commenting on how beautiful the pattern on these cards really is. After all, in this den, they are meticulous and only use the highest quality decks available. Moreover, they have many other games for novices, so he offers Julian another choice. Our hero is shocked by this sudden turn of events. Apparently, Lord Donovan already knew they had stolen the marked cards from the very start. Anyway, they continue by suggesting they could play other games like Catch the Thief. After this hint, Barnaby asks if the hero is ready, because in that case they will place the bets. Taking the lead, Lord Donovan slams a huge pile of gold onto the table to start the match. Since he rarely plays as the owner, he believes this is the best way to have fun. Still, Julian says he has no money. But as they were already expecting this, Barnaby reminds him that it is possible to play with a collateral. All he has to do is sign a dark scroll for a literal life pledge debt. He must mark the part of the body matching the value he wants to bet. At first, Julian cannot react. Not just him, but the other people start to get scared that something this dark is happening in the den. Then Lord Donovan mocks him, asking if the boy is afraid to bet. Gideon knows there is definitely a scam happening. Thank the gods they realized before betting. Barnaby feels relieved to see his friend might actually back out. However, he notices that for some reason, everyone else is starting to get very scared. Julian simply starts signing that life debt paper, looking strangely satisfied to be able to play by leaving his own body in exchange. Naturally, his colleagues start to panic over this total madness. But Julian refuses to run like a coward, betting everything from the hair on his head down to the nails on his very toes. After that bold bet, the hall falls silent until Lord Donovan finally accepts the challenge with a twisted pleasure. His friends know there is a cheat involved, so they cannot understand what on earth Julian is thinking right now. So what do you and I think? Is Julian a genius or just insane? We are about to find out. All right, stick with me. You're about to watch Alistair Thorne take the first turn. He laughs, claiming he loves how simple this game is. He flips over a card showing an 8, followed quickly by a 9. Since the numbers do not match, the turn passes to Baron Draven to try his hand. Just as expected, the villainous Baron conveniently flips a 9, the exact card Alistair just revealed. Remembering the layout, he pulls the second 9 instantly. Everyone is stunned by his luck, but as they say in these high-stakes wagers, fortune is everything. Draven prepares his next move with a smug face. Even he can't believe it. Actually, he knows exactly where every card sits. He had secretly arranged the deck with the bribed judge. He memorized the entire board before they even started. Without any proof, it's the perfect, simple way to cheat everyone blind. He's convinced Alistair will sit there clueless until he loses his last crown, defenseless and pathetic. Years ago, the Baron's father asked why the boy admired him so much. Now, watch closely. Draven honestly told him it was because he made so much coin. His father just laughed and gave him a playful flick. The man felt proud to provide for his son's future. To young Draven, his father was the most secure man alive. Or at least, that's what he believed back then. In truth, his father wasn't at the counting house. He was at the gambling dens. He racked up 50,000 gold crowns in debt to loan sharks. He fell into a trap like a fool, desperately trying to bring home a fortune for his son's happiness. The rigged games destroyed him completely. Seeing this tonight, Draven refuses to be a pathetic victim like his father once was. Having matched several pairs already, he decides he'd much rather be the deceiver. Outside his mind, the crowd mocks Alistair for his terrible luck. To them, the hero has nothing left but to weep as the butchers prepare to take his life. However, Alistair suddenly asks if it is time to show them all. He asks if he should prove that this game is actually rigged from the start. Suddenly, on his last attempt, Alistair pulls 2 cards with the Queen's crest. People think it's just a lucky coincidence or a fluke. Even if God favored him now, reaching 16 pairs seemed impossible for any man. You and I can see where this is going. He hits pair after pair perfectly. The crowd is baffled by his sudden mastery. 13 pairs are cleared in a row, and the match is nearly over. Baron Draven finally feels a chill of fear. Only he and the judge knew the cards' locations. But knowing this was enough to reveal the traitor. The day before, a secret note was left near 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 the clerk. Driven by curiosity, 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 picked it up to see what was inside. That was when he remembered Alistair betting that scrap of paper, just to stay in the game earlier. Opening it, he found a message telling him to meet in the shadows at a specific hour. Following his gut, 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 met him. Alistair got straight to the point. He knew exactly how they were cheating with the marked deck. 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 didn't confess immediately, terrified of the brutal consequences he would face. Yet, he knew cards had been stolen and likely replaced with a set of marked ones by the house. That's why the hero summoned him, to offer the young man a desperate chance to save his own skin. 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 and the other clerks were only working to pay off debts, having put their own lives up as collateral to the cruel Baron. In this moment, Alistair offered to pay off his entire debt if 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 helped him. The clerk was terrified. If the plan went wrong, he knew he'd be a dead man. Alistair heard the boy's debt was massive, and he'd never be able to pay it once he was free. After all, 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 had only 7 days left until he was released from his service here. The hero truly doubted 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒆 wanted to be dragged to a butcher's block the second he found freedom. So, he gave him a task as simple as rolling a pair of dice while resting. All he had to do was expose the truth about the rigged games when everyone was watching. Back in the present, Alistair smiles and remarks that his luck seems to be holding up quite well. While the Baron struggles to understand, Alistair clarifies. Perhaps his memory is just legendary, since he memorized every single card the Baron and his thugs had predetermined earlier tonight. Let that sink in. All right, you and I are about to see Nate blow the whistle on this rigged gambling den once and for all. Nate even claims he can show the prisoners exactly how they were cheated, sending the entire crowd into a panic as they scream for the boss to explain himself right now. Lord Dominic, trembling with absolute rage, asks if they really have the nerve to call his establishment a sham. With his face practically bubbling with fury, he asserts that such a claim is nothing more than a ridiculous lie. He tries to talk his way out of the mess, but Arthur doesn't give him a second, immediately slamming his face into the stone. This was the perfect justification. He needed to finally strike. Earlier, Lord Dominic had stated in the council meeting that if fraud was found in his den, it would be the end of him. So, just like the mobster said himself, Arthur was there and ready to make sure that promise was kept. Years ago, when the bills were piling up, a desperate father pounded on the door for his son to open, thinking he had a right to be there. Lord Dominic, confused, asked his father what he meant by those strange words. Ben, huddled on the floor, insisted he had done nothing wrong because his son wanted a father who made money, and in his pursuit of that life, he lost everything. Sometime after this tragedy, the debts from gambling became so heavy that his father ended up bedridden. That was when Dominic realized that without gold, he could not protect his family from the cruel and difficult reality of the world around him. Back in the present. Now pay attention here. Arthur is about to finish this man for good, but an inconvenient surprise stops him just as he was going to land his final crushing blow. Dominic had escaped, or so it seemed, before he suddenly appeared from behind and sent Arthur flying with a massive, heavy punch. Besides betraying his trust, Nate had also incriminated the boss as a fraud, so Dominic grabbed him by the neck to make him pay a high price. Even while being choked, Nate screams that he has the evidence to prove every single word he is saying. Dominic demands to know where this evidence is, but luckily for him, the other judge is already busy hiding the truth in the shadows. The boss plays the victim, claiming he is the one who should be angry and deal out the proper punishment. Dominic never imagined his own man would conspire with a total stranger just to pay off some personal debts. Meanwhile, Arthur moves fast, seeing this whole situation as proof that everything in this world revolves around money. He throws Nate toward the boss and states with clenched fists that he has no interest in judging him. However, he also makes it clear that he has no intention of forgiving him for what he did. I know what you are thinking. Is our hero actually running away? Well, watch this as the prisoners panic and Dominic assumes he is gone. However, Arthur calls out from behind that he would never run, then kicks him so hard he sails across the room. Arthur was never going to flee. Flashback to that hospital bed, where the poor father was still lost in a deep and dark unconsciousness. Dominic told the doctor that it was the gambling that had left his father in such a terrible state. No matter how much resentment he felt, he knew that his father had been carrying many heavy responsibilities. In the end, he decided to protect his family by paying off those debts using the same cruel gambling methods that caused them. That day, the man behind the smuggling schemes claimed that the decision was not entirely his father's to make. And he said that was why taking care of a child all alone was such a difficult task. Since the father had paid the debt, the thug wondered why the boy was still standing there in front of him. He asked if it was a son's love, but Dominic just asked how much that love would actually pay him. Since he could not protect his family, he chose to sell them. Back now, he shouts that he never once thought about fleeing this fight. At least not if he could not take every single coin with him. Arthur dodges and wonders why this man only talks about money. Arthur realizes that fighting is not the boss's strong suit, as every blow he lands makes the situation look even uglier for Dominic. Dominic still responds before taking another punch, asking if being a fighter is really that important. Nate tries to shout a warning, but Arthur takes a knee to the stomach that makes him spit out blood. To make things worse, a powerful left hook sends the boy crashing into the objects scattered around the room. To Dominic, idiots like Arthur are only good for working under his orders and waiting for their small pay. And that is where we leave it. You and I will see this boss pay. Jax is slammed into the shattered frame of the Baron's carriage, ending the duel. Everyone's disappointed. He talked big but ended up a complete mess. Nicholas watches, wondering what happened to the boy. Baron Draven, meanwhile, offers a fake apology for the chaos he sparked in his hall. He tries to claim it was all just a freak accident, nothing to do with the rigged bets in his underground pit. Draven claims he'll fix everything, but pay attention, because you and I are about to see Jax speak up again. Jax mocks the warlord, admitting he was wrong to call him a fraud, confessing there is no turning back now, even if he did regret it. Draven scoffed, thinking a few desperate words would not change his fate. But our hero retorts that he doesn't need a reason. This whole place is just one big game. So he proposes a new challenge. Let's see if the Baron can survive a game of hide and seek. This isn't a game for children. Jax warns that if Draven doesn't hide himself carefully enough, he will track him down, find his head, and then rip it off as a bloody reward. Draven staggers up, unable to believe the destruction. His hall is a total mess, and everything he's ever built is crumbling around him. The Baron roars one last time, refusing to run away like a coward with his tail between his legs. But luck isn't on his side. Jax catches him instantly, threatening to burn his entire world to ashes right then. The protagonist sighs, admitting he actually hates playing this game of tag. So let's watch what he suggests instead. A little game of dice where the number showing on the top face must always be 3. Jax begins pummeling the warlord, declaring that those 3 strikes are his well-earned reward. Draven roars in fury, asking how the boy dares to humiliate him with such a primitive scheme. He claims he's no mindless brawler who just throws punches without a plan. He shouts that he has massive ambitions for the kingdom. But Jax just rolls the dice again. Suddenly, all that arrogant boasting turns into pure, cold terror. See, Jax knows the Baron has big plans. Too bad his luck just ran out. The dice land on 6 markings. Draven screams in a bubbling rage, begging the boy to stop his insane talking, but it's too late. 6 heavy blows land, exactly according to the rules of the game, leaving the proud warlord completely finished on the floor. Years ago, a local ink master was thrilled the boy finally got permission for his mark. Carp and monster tattoos were the trend among young squires back then. So, before he sat down, the girl asked which mark he was requesting. Without a second thought, he pointed to the dragon etched across her own chest. The girl tried to play dumb, acting embarrassed that he was staring so intently. Draven revealed his secret. He knew she was a scout for the Celestial Dragon Guild. That was exactly why he wanted to join their ranks. He knew that gaining the guild's support would accelerate his plans, bringing in massive, absurd amounts of gold for his treasury. The girl laughed, saying she preferred a man who'd risk his life over his gold any day. He snatched the needle away, declaring that for enough gold, he'd gladly risk his life as many times as it took, even if it meant stabbing it into his own neck. That grit was enough to convince the girl. She asked what he truly wanted from the guild. His first request, to be sent to the very dungeon he's in now. Back in the present, he screams for everyone to move. Draven is practically crawling on the stone floor, barking orders for no one to dare stand in his way. I know what you're thinking. Is he getting away? Draven thinks he's safe since his men already torched the evidence. He believes the other dungeon lords will still come to his aid, since there is no proof left. But that only works if Julian hadn't already snatched the proof. With a heavy wooden beam, he sends the fleeing leader soaring across the room. The prisoners look on, confused by the man whose life is literally scattered on the ground. Julian tells them to look closer. One of the corrupt guards is trying to flee with the evidence. It's the smoking gun proving this whole operation was a scam. Nicholas starts feeling hopeful again, seeing his friend can actually be useful. Rebellion starts brewing among the captives. Yet, Draven still doesn't realize just how far he's fallen. Even as he collapses, he clings to his gold, only caring about protecting the fortune he spilled so much blood to earn. Jax decides to help him cool off by pouring a little flammable oil on his clothes. After emptying the jug, he announces the next game, and the very last one they will ever play. Jax likes to call this last little challenge, Survive the Lightning Strike. Since Draven failed the last round, this is his final turn. The Baron doesn't even care about his life, just his gold. And trust me, you and I know he was warned about this a long time ago. All right, you and I are about to watch Lord Donovan's legacy burn to ashes. The magical current is so intense, it's literally leaking off the stage. But before doing anything, Alistair stares at the broken Lord Donovan lying defeated on the cold ground. The shock of seeing his fortune burn was too much, and he fainted. Donovan was totally beaten and defenseless, but that wasn't the main problem. The real issue was seeing which of the other prisoners would seize the chance to steal the gold for themselves. And to make matters worse for Donovan, that silver-haired boy from the meeting was witnessing his entire downfall. Since his theories were finally confirmed, he would make sure to seize leadership from the fallen gangster. 14 months later, prisoner number 7849 is finally set free. Lord Donovan leaves the Iron Keep knowing he failed his mission. However, he has a smirk on his face because he's already planning a much grander revenge. As soon as he exits the gates, however, the Merchant of Shadows arrives to greet him. Just like he did with the others, he brought hired thugs, boasting that he'd be the one taking care of him. Donovan apologized for not providing goods from inside the keep, but claimed he would get back on his feet soon. Hearing this, the merchant agreed with the young man's plan. But first, he reminded him of the gold he'd borrowed for his past failures. In the end, both knew he was broke, but they were professionals in a cutthroat business. Now pay attention here. As professionals, they knew there were other ways to pay off a massive debt like this. Lord Donovan, however, did not expect his creditors to be quite so impatient. To make matters worse, the merchant calculated the interest from then until now, stating the debt had reached 1 billion gold coins. Instead of arguing, he shoved the former boss into a carriage, since a mysterious client was already waiting for him. Back in the present, Thorn and Bram warned that Donovan was officially out of the game, thanks to their sharp observations. But Julian quickly reminded them that he helped. Anyway, Alistair thought he had already dismantled 3 of the Order of the Crimson Dragon's main strongholds. But another target remained, and he'd just shown up inside Alistair's own cell. You and I both knew this guy was going to be trouble. As if that weren't enough, he held up a picture of Lady Alara, mocking him. She was the same girl who had died in that tragic carriage accident. Alistair didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist into the boy's face and pinned him to the floor before asking Thorn and Bram for a pillow to muffle the sounds. He needed it so no screams would be heard, echoing through the dark prison corridors. Before this, the silver-haired boy was in a cell covered in crude writings about someone's mother. He found it all incredibly boring and asked if there was anything interesting enough to give him a thrill. After tracking them down easily, the silver-haired boy received a very unexpected visit from our hero. Stick with me, because this is where it gets interesting. He asked if this was where one of the Order's seeds was hiding. Since that was the case, he'd have to uproot every single one of them in his own affectionate way. Surprisingly, the silver-haired boy was impressed. He finally found the excitement he needed, back in the present. Alistair continues smashing the boy's face against the stone wall, with his fists raised high. He decided to silence the boy since he was making too much noise. But just before the final strike, something appeared right in front of his face. Even in that situation, the boy mocked him, calling it a little surprise for the hero. He revealed a tattoo of the dragon crest and asked if Alistair was looking for this mark. Using the momentum to escape his grip, the boy suggested they work together to kill the dragons. He claimed it was all just a big misunderstanding. He insisted the photo had simply fallen out of his book, and there was no malice behind it. After all, in his own mind, he was a benefactor who only wanted to help. Alistair snatched the photo back and told the boy to get lost, but he just laughed, saying the hero was far more stupid than he originally seemed. As a cell leader, Alistair is free to fight as much as he wants in here. But if he keeps charging after enemies without thinking, he'll end up dead at their hands. He warned that this prison holds monsters far more dangerous than he can imagine, and asked if Alistair still refused his help. Like it or not, a stranger appearing from nowhere with a wild proposal wasn't exactly trustworthy. Our hero was still trying to understand what this mysterious prisoner would actually gain by helping him. Alistair stares at the boy, wondering what he's really after. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. All right, you and I are about to see a guy who lives for nothing but the pure rush of chaos. The next day, at the harsh royal detention camp, the local thugs can't believe their luck. Right in the middle of these stinking, rough pits, a group of noble girls had suddenly arrived. Since they served the great temple, the prisoners with dark hearts suddenly started praising the divine. As expected from the high cathedral, the thugs whispered that their beauty was a whole different level of blessing. One tried to join in, but Lady Luna's prayer went sideways. Regardless, the fact the Imperial Cathedral is backing this event grabs Julian's attention immediately. Years ago, in a temple just like this, a voice sang for him to hide before the search began. It was a childhood game. Diana, his closest friend until 17, was the one singing that old hide-and-seek melody. After searching the grounds, she finally tracked Julian down to where he was hiding. She caught him napping again, making him a bit snappy. But Diana was just worried about him catching a chill in the freezing night air. Julian told her anywhere was better than his broken home, which left the girl in awkward silence. A door creaked open, making Julian ask if she brought company. She shook her head no. It was young Luna, searching for a sister from their local orphanage. Before even spotting them, Luna yelled that being late would mean a harsh punishment. Julian asked why Diana was pinned against him, and trust me, her excuse about hiding was pretty thin. The memory fades. Back in the present, these low-life thugs are still trying to charm the temple girls. One brute fixates on a specific girl who practically glows with a sweet voice and heavenly beauty. They pointed her out right in the center, looking like a true saint. Julian's jaw nearly hit the floor. After all, that girl was definitely Luna from his past. And just as Julian recognized her, their eyes locked, and she knew exactly who he was too. Later, in the mess hall, a girl calls out to her elder sister, reminding her they came to spread the light. But looking at these rabid prisoners, she sees zero hope for salvation. They look at the girls like hungry predators. That is why they flock toward the sisters serving the rations. One prisoner hands over a box, maliciously licking a tin can with a disgusting, hidden message. The two girls are terrified of what might be lurking inside those boxes. The elder sister practically screams they should stop helping this scum, earning a sharp scolding. She still thinks feeding these animals is a total waste of bread. Breaking the tension, a prisoner named Joseph stepped up and politely thanked them for the meal. He offered his thanks to the sisters, wishing for the divine grace to always protect them. The girls thought Joseph might be a true believer, but besides praying to the Father and the Holy Spirit, he also prayed to the Eastern gods. You and I can see why their hope for a fellow believer died right there. Eventually, the girls wondered where Luna had vanished to, since she only promised to take a short break. In a dark, hidden corner, Luna wondered why the space was so tight. Pressed right up against Julian, she felt embarrassed by the sudden heat. He apologized, claiming it was the only place he could find for some real peace and quiet. Anyway, it had been years since they spoke like this, so the atmosphere felt incredibly strange. Back then, the three of them were inseparable and had the best times imaginable. Eventually, Luna brings up their old friend Diana, recalling the exact moment she left them. Julian tries to find the right words to say about it. Luna cuts him off, saying she knew they were always a pair. It was always just those two. She pulls him into a hug, whispering that she knows how hard those years must have been. Shedding her temple persona for a moment, she whispers how lonely he must have truly been. Years back, when Luna first walked through the academy, students swore they had never seen such a beauty. But some already knew she was the star of the first years, even though they were on the second floor. Everyone was curious who she was visiting. She walked right up to Julian, asking why he ignored her. He offered a quick apology, but he hadn't even spared her a single glance. Anyway, she had a pile of birthday gift vouchers and suggested that Julian help her spend them. But he refused immediately, saying he already had important plans with Diana for that night. He apologized and walked away to handle his business, leaving Luna standing there all by herself. Her face showed she wasn't giving up, and that's where we leave it. Julian is completely stunned by this reunion. All right, stick with me as we see a lady confessing how lonely this cruel world can truly be. Because she knows that pain, she refuses to leave Sir Julian alone and promises to be his helping hand. By the way, our silent hero still had not replied to a single one of her many letters. So he apologized as always, claiming he was busy and asked if something was wrong. But the lady just laughed at his serious face while trying her best to show off her body. However, it was so he could read the runes on her tattoo clearly. Suddenly, talk of a Captain Blackwood interrupts them. Guards hear about lunch being served, and being hungry, they rush away. Hearing this, Lady Luna remembers her duties and becomes desperate for having rested far too long. So she says goodbye, saying it was wonderful to see the protagonist after so long. And Julian says the same, assuring her he will meet her outside in 3 years. But the lady warns that won't be needed, because she plans to return by next week. From now on, the Cathedral of Light will make regular visits every single Sunday. For her, this is perfect, as they will finally be able to see each other more often. Later, she asks if the prisoners like the meal, and wearing an apron, she offers to clean the mess. The dregs behave politely, saying that as trash, they should handle it themselves. But she truly does not consider herself superior. Anyway, all that dull conversation disgusts the other girls, until one of them speaks loud enough for the hero to hear that the girl is flirting. One claims Alina is brave to act like that with criminals, while the other nearly retches in disgust. They conclude that the rumors about her must be true, specifically, those tales about her visiting wayward inns lately. The two mockingly call her a saint, but a saint of lust who adores the flesh. During the next service, a missionary lady cries to the heavens, while the prisoners joke about their own needs. Trust me, they do not even try to believe in the Creator. Finally, John 8:29 is recited with the phrase, "You shall know the truth." Any soul can be freed from sin, in the truth and love of the great Creator. Which means they can be free. So, just for today, this nun decided the prisoners would be free to enjoy a special performance. Suddenly, those opportunistic thugs began to believe in the divine once more, as if by some miracle. Without those heavy robes, the girls from the cathedral looked much more relaxed and exposed. So, as they performed a sort of dance, those thirsty prisoners obviously began to worship, even more so when they realized that the saint was participating in the midst. One of those filthy thugs said some truly rude things about her beauty. Another prisoner teamed up with him to sneak toward the break room and do something truly wicked. After the show, one girl confides in the nun that she could not hear a thing over the noise. Meanwhile, young Lady Minjai was playing with a colleague when those prisoners outside began to get excited. And from what they had already heard, they were eager to see colors and other things, too. How they could get there. Now watch this. The hero was right there to show them the red they would only see in hell. But before he could strike, someone else acted and upheld the 7th commandment of the heavens. Sir Joseph recited the law against adultery while crushing those two scoundrels for the sin they were about to commit. For their blasphemy against the holy name, he warned them that he would show no mercy or forgiveness. The locker room door opens, leaving the girls confused. Alina rushes to Julian to ask him what is happening. Before he can answer, she sees the broken bodies of the two thugs lying cold on the stone floor. She hides behind the boy who asks if she is afraid, and Alina simply offers her sincere apologies. A week later, at another service, the nun speaks again of how the heavens can forgive even the worst. Meanwhile, in the donation vaults, transporting the heavy goods was proving to be quite a challenge. To make things worse, a group of 3 armed brigands were hiding behind him in the shadows. Although they had been discovered, it was too late to react. So one of them lunged with a knife. Soon, the other two did as well, trying to stab the protagonist together. However, using a large water bale to defend himself. Sir Edward responds that the heavens may punish them for this. After all, they just damaged many donated goods. Without hesitation, the protagonist crushes the bale, soaking all three of them. And while they are dazed, he goes behind them, saying he knows they are not the ones behind this. So he simply knocks all three to the ground, and with a frightening expression, asks who is the mastermind. You and I will have to wait for the fallout, as a guard interrupts and asks what they are doing. Trust me, it only gets worse. Julian spots a young acolyte huddled in the dark corner of the vault. Even our hero is rattled. He had no idea she was lurking there. Seeing her state, he starts to panic. He's terrified the guards have already done something horrific to her. Then the unthinkable happens. Elara points directly at Julian and claims he was the monster who attacked her. Flashback to a secret deal. A high price was set for some illicit photos at 7 o'clock. An old noble was pleased, and a girl told him there was no turning back. It was Elara. She demanded 500 gold crowns, asking the noble if he really had that kind of coin. The man laughed, boasting he had gold to burn. He started gloating about her beauty, telling her she should thank the heavens for his attention. Then he leered at her and demanded she sit by his side. He had no idea what was coming. Suddenly, a massive crash echoed through the room as a giant of a man smashed. All right, you and I are about to watch this noble desperately try to talk his way out of an illegal meeting. Especially since the man claimed to be a high priest of the Holy Order. Shaking, the priest asked if they dared threaten a man of his great influence, only to get a heavy fist right to his jaw and several more hits immediately after. To the young man, this wasn't even a crime because with that behavior, he was no priest, but a cult leader. Plus, Lady Alina had an enchanted scrying glass hidden in her bag, recording everything. Now pay attention. The brute tells the priest not to worry because they can make a deal to keep this secret in the name of the gods. Many weeks had passed. Deep inside the Iron Spire dungeons, the prisoner Julian Vance was sentenced to 10 days of confinement in the cold, dark pits. The same jailer sneered, asking if he had pulled another stunt during his last visitor hour. Everyone knew the warden favored the boy, but since an outsider was involved this time, his punishment in the pits was absolutely non-negotiable. To make matters worse, the High Council's magic eyes were monitoring every movement. The sentry made it clear he could not let him walk and had to leave. But he couldn't help but curse, wondering how Julian could be so reckless while trapped inside stone walls. Out of nowhere, his former ally, Lady Alina, had accused him of committing a grave sin against her. He was still reeling from the betrayal. Later that day, during the cathedral's feast, once the official duties were finally finished. Trust me, you and I both know this reunion in the prison courtyard is about to get very uncomfortable. Sir Joseph Hawthorne stepped forward, noting it had been a long time since he had seen Lady Alina. She knew this dungeon was rotten, but she never imagined the rot went this deep. To the point where prisoners were roaming free. Joseph explained that the cell lords paid the warden monthly gold for their freedom. But even if that was not the case, he claimed seeing Alina was worth any risk. It reminded him of the old days, judging heretics side by side as true companions. So what do you and I take from this? True monsters always hide behind a holy mask. All right, you and I are meeting Arthur's most loyal assistant. Arthur had specifically requested her help for this mission, hoping to finally put an end to the ongoing problem involving the treacherous Julian. Back in that dark dungeon, no matter how hard Arthur thought, Arthur realized the situation was a total setup. Those thugs coming at him with makeshift blades were just a noisy distraction meant to buy time while the real trap was being laid. The real plan was to use Alina to frame him for attacking a noble woman. But right as the tension peaked at the most critical moment. But here's the part you need to watch. She suddenly claimed that she'd been rescued. Alina accused the three villains of kidnapping her, and named Julian as her heroic savior instead. The guard ordered everyone out of the dungeon immediately, leaving Arthur to ponder the mystery of how Alina had ended up as a pawn in someone else's game. He had no clue who was behind it, or why she suddenly changed her mind at the last second. Back in the present, Arthur reaches out to the warden with a specific request, though the guard warns that the scrying orbs make any secret moves nearly impossible. Arthur insists he just needs the man to summon someone special to the fortress gates. Meanwhile, out in the courtyard, "You and I saw this coming." Joseph mentions that when the girl visited the prison last week, she was hiding behind someone to avoid him, and he caught it immediately. "All right, you and I are about to see how twisted this bishop really is." He gave Alina a blade to judge the heretic with her own hands. Yet, after all that praise, he demanded to know why she failed to strike the boy down. Trembling, Alina asked if they could finally end these brutal executions, reminding him she had done every dark task he ordered outside the castle walls until now. The bishop coldly asked if she had forgotten he still held the incriminating letters of her past. Since she had served him well, all she needed to do was keep playing her part as his loyal shadow. But then he mentioned her mother's safety, the final straw. Alina stood her ground and threatened to report his crimes to the High Council. She screamed about his corruption, but before she could finish, his guards restrained her, leaving her no chance to fight back against the injustice. While she was pinned down, Joseph called her nothing more than a filthy heretic. He told her not to worry, though, because he intended to purify her soul right then and there, using his own special methods. Alina wailed in total despair, fearing for her life, but the man didn't care. In this isolated wasteland, no one would ever hear her screams. It was just the two of them, and things looked hopeless, until the carriage door suddenly rattled, catching the bishop's sinister attention. Slowly, a figure began to climb the steps of the royal transport, and the girl's sobbing finally came to an end. There at the end of the aisle stood Julian, free from his iron cell and looking ready for blood as Joseph demanded answers. He couldn't fathom how the prisoner escaped his chains, but even with his hands still on the girl, he didn't move an inch. "Now pay attention here. This is where the tension gets absolutely insane." He told Julian to wait because he had some business to finish. He pulled the emergency lever, sealing the doors shut so he could end exactly what he started here. Thinking back to his talk with the guard, the girl Julian had called for was clearly confused by the situation. A white-haired boy was jealous of Julian's private chamber and wanted to enter, but Julian told him he wasn't there for any games. The main character remembered that the boy had offered help before, claiming he owed Julian for saving his life once. Julian was demanding his proof now, wanting to see exactly how this messy-haired kid could actually be of any use to him. Suddenly, the casual talk died out, leaving only one serious question. He needed to know what Julian required help with, and he wanted every single detail. In the present, Alina sees her hero, and with pure rage, Julian tells Joseph to get away from her. The bishop just laughs it off. Even angrier now, Julian bellows for the man to leave the girl alone. Joseph finally stands up, claiming this was nothing more than a simple religious blessing for the wayward girl. He mocked Julian, saying heathens could never understand his ways. But Julian moved first, burying a powerful punch deep into the bishop's gut. He told the holy man to shut his lying mouth because, for what he did to Alina, he had committed enough sins to deserve being torn apart piece by piece. Julian unleashed a storm of iron fists against the criminal until his robes were shredded, yet Joseph stood like a wall. "You and I saw that coming, right? Well, this villain is tougher than he looks." He even praised Julian's precision. But Julian just answered with a kick, refusing to explain his tactics to a piece of trash. Joseph explained his unnatural strength, claiming it wasn't human power but a divine gift granted solely to him by the heavens themselves. He bragged about his blessed body and decided to prove it with a single, crushing holy strike. The impact made the carriage shake like an earthquake, and as the face of a vengeful angel appeared, the girl watched in horror. Her friend fell hard to the floor. Joseph claimed his duty was to judge heretics, asking Alina if she agreed with his divine will. This all started years ago, back at the summer retreat for young believers. Alina revealed she was living apart from her kin due to heavy debts. She prayed to the gods that one day she could afford to live with her mother again. Everyone thought she was brave for surviving on her own after her father's failures, working tirelessly to pay off every coin of the family's burden. So, they felt deep pity and offered prayers for her soul. Later, a mysterious man eavesdropping in the shadows whispered, "Amen." It was late when he finally stepped out and called the girl's name. Joseph introduced himself, claiming he had been a fellow attendee at the previous week's Holy Assembly. By a stroke of fate, he had learned of the tragic circumstances regarding her family. He claimed there was a fast way to wipe away her debts, which immediately caught the desperate girl's attention. And that's where we leave it. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this deal turns deadly. Looking at her now, he was convinced Alina was the perfect candidate for his twisted little project. Back on the carriage, with the heretic who dared to approach his sister, Joseph is already celebrating his victory, preparing to pass a brutal judgment on his captured enemy. Suddenly, a heavy umbrella cracks against the back of his skull, accompanied by an embarrassed shout from Alina, who is totally fed up. She demands he stop the madness before he grabs Arthur by the shins and throws him with enough force to shatter the carriage's enchanted glass window. Alina is panicking, but she's about to face an even bigger problem than a broken window. A sharp slap across the face follows, and despite calling her a fallen soul, Joseph tells her not to worry because his ritual of purification is about to begin. Trust me, watch this. Let me tell you, things are looking grim for our hero right now. Arthur collapses to his knees, coughing up blood all over the carriage floor as his body finally begins to fail him. Arthur looks up, reminding this bastard of the words he spat out earlier. He once bragged about hitting only the most vital spots, and even a blessed knight's body can't survive that internal carnage. Julian sneers, mocking the fact that Arthur looks like he's at death's door. To him, this agony is nothing. It is a drop in the ocean compared to the misery his own daughter and friends suffered. Now watch closely. Here's where Arthur decides to settle the score. He grabs the alchemical acid nearby. Arthur declares that monsters who commit such vile crimes deserve both a physical and an alchemical reckoning. In plain terms, he is about to perform a crude, homemade castration on this absolute scumbag. We flash back to before their time in the Iron Spire, where Arthur thought she was being dramatic. But Alara shook her head, insisting that everything was going exactly according to her grand design. Her expression was heavy, so he asked if the food was bad. But the real problem, knowing every other child there had a mother while she was alone. Arthur just shrugged it off, telling her it didn't matter because he grew up without a mother too. Even as a young boy, he never felt like life was that difficult just because he was an orphan. You and I both know how deep these promises go. Alara cut him off, reminding him of her vow to return. She asked if he understood the meaning of her mark. "I will always be waiting for you." It was a message of love intended for her mother, etched forever onto her skin. Back inside the carriage, Arthur tells Alara to hold on just a bit longer. This bloody mess will be over very soon. He promised that the monster right in front of them would face a punishment so severe that he would never be able to repeat his vile crimes again. Julian screams in frustration, claiming he has never done anything foul or impure in his entire life. But he lunges at Arthur anyway, knowing that words are useless against the fury in the man's eyes. Truth is, he's sick of playing the holy man when he's really just a demon in human skin. And that's where we leave it for now, with Arthur's internal injuries finally catching up to him. Stick with me. Arthur asks if he still hasn't realized that every move only brings him more pain. The two trade brutal blows, striking with every ounce of strength they possess. Julian struggles to understand how this relentless damage keeps mounting. Arthur simply tells the knight to go ahead and test his luck. Now watch, A brutal clash of fists erupts between the 𝒂𝒏𝒎𝒂𝒕𝒆's two strongest warriors. The fight turns savage, but Julian hits his limit as his supposedly invincible body finally starts to give out. Pushed into a corner, the coward decides his only escape is to use Lady Alara as a human shield. Arthur mocks him for needing a hostage despite his blessed body. Trust me, we are about to see Julian regret that. Let's dive in as Julian shuts down that vile idea with a brutal kick to the traitor's face. He admits it had been ages since he fought a knight of his stature. Adjusting to a real duel took a moment, but honestly, compared to a certain master, 𝒀𝒏𝒎𝒂𝒕𝒆 was absolutely nothing. The tide finally turns as the villain collapses onto the carriage floor. But strangely, the man just starts laughing. Julian demands to know why, but pay attention here. The boy reveals he still holds onto every enchanted crystal documenting the lady's crimes. He mocks them, wondering how the Duchess would react if she discovered what her precious daughter had truly done. That the lady wasn't just a victim, but a master of blackmail who sold noble secrets through dark threats. 𝒀𝒏𝒎𝒂𝒕𝒆 is dying to see the horror on the Duchess's face. Trust me, you and I are in for a wild ride. All right, stick with me. Julian refuses to back down and tells the man to go ahead, coldly listing 5 counts of assault, 9 attempts, and 4 harassments. Stick with me, we're about to see this villain pay for his sins. Julian promised that every single dirty secret would be exposed to the entire kingdom. He held the shock artifact high, telling the coward to threaten him properly next time. The scoundrels screamed in terror, wondering how a mere commoner possessed such a powerful magical weapon. But Julian didn't hesitate, slamming the lightning bolt directly into the man's most sensitive spot. Just like Julian promised, he made sure this monster would never be able to commit those vile acts ever again. Julian had seen enough evil in his time, and that single blast ensured the criminal would never feel like a man for the rest of his life. He didn't need a blade to deliver a sentence worse than any dungeon cage. Now pay attention, because Alara is finally safe as she rushes toward Julian. She begged for his forgiveness, blaming herself for the danger, but Julian just shook his head and asked if he was really the one she should be worried about. He demanded to know why she kept these deadly threats a secret from him for so long. Instead of answering, she just played with her hair nervously, asking how he even found her in this mess. Julian smiled, pointing out her obvious tell. She always fidgeted with her hair whenever she was trying to hide a secret from him. Realizing she had been caught, she offered another soft apology to him. Anyway, Julian reached out to tend to a scratch on her cheek, making her blush instantly. Alara insisted it was a minor wound, but Julian wasn't having it. He made her promise to never put herself in such a dangerous position ever again. Feeling the warmth of his genuine protection, she turned beet red and couldn't look away. She was secretly overjoyed by his care, until a sudden roar interrupted them as someone called out from a heavy iron carriage nearby. It was that wild-haired rogue Barnaby, and for some reason, he was actually controlling the horses. He joked that Julian's nightly romance was making him feel like a lonely old bachelor. Nobody understood why he was suddenly whipping the horses into a frenzy. Barnaby didn't care about the consequences. He just wanted to push this carriage to its absolute limit as revenge for every single person who was lonely like him. I know what you're thinking. Barnaby is chaotic. He basically wanted all happy couples in hell. You see, the underground syndicates have many ways to make bodies disappear, from burying enemies in stone to dumping them in the dark depths of the sea. These are all effective ways to erase any trace of a crime. But Sir 𝒀𝒏𝒎𝒂𝒕𝒆, the right-hand man of the Dragon Syndicate's leader, didn't agree with those methods. He found them unnecessary. His guild preferred to keep their victims in a state where they could be reused whenever needed. That is why they used powerful ice magic to freeze their enemies alive. Before starting the process, 𝒀𝒏𝒎𝒂𝒕𝒆 asked the victim if he had any final words. The man screamed, demanding to know who ordered this, shouting that the Great Alliance would never forgive the Dragon Syndicate's arrogance. He warned that if they didn't stop this madness immediately, the syndicate would soon find themselves drowning in filth. But he would only discover his fate by experiencing the frost from the inside. Without a shred of mercy, Silas threw the man into the icy chamber. Suddenly, a message stone began to glow in his pocket. It was an urgent report from the iron hold, and he answered immediately, identifying himself as the syndicate's chief of operations. The guard on the other side delivered the news, but Silas found the report completely impossible to believe. Back at the carriage, Julian still had no idea why Barnaby was acting like a total madman. If they didn't slow down soon, a catastrophic disaster was definitely going to happen. Not only was the speed dangerous, but the knights would think they were trying to escape. Barnaby didn't care at all, proving it by drifting the heavy carriage around a corner with reckless abandon. The carriage slammed directly into the wall of the iron hold, shattering the stone and creating a massive breach. Julian immediately checked to see if Alara was hurt, before furiously screaming at Barnaby and asking if he had completely lost his mind. Barnaby just mumbled something quietly through the dust and debris. Julian couldn't hear him, so Barnaby shouted again, telling them both to run for their lives. He didn't even wait for a response, shoving the two out of the wreck before the knights arrived. A few minutes later, once the chaos settled, the royal guards had finally cleared the area. It was a brilliant setup. Now that scoundrel would be blamed for the escape attempt, with no scrying orbs to prove his innocence. Everything worked out perfectly. Barnaby finally decided to head out, but not before giving them a mischievous wink and wishing them a very romantic evening together. So we're left with this. Julian warns Alara that the royal knights are hunting her. Alara knows she must leave, but first, she realizes she was forgetting the most vital piece of their history. You and I are about to see how a simple bear charm can hold the weight of an entire world. Looking at Alistair's face, it is clear that despite being a simple trinket, this bear pendant means everything. A while back at a famous village fair, Arthur won 3 times in a row on a machine where she always failed, getting those as rewards. Alara practically begged our hero to try his luck, but he could not win a single prize for himself. Since he had 3 charms, Arthur thought it made sense to share one with each of them, since they were all orphans without any real family. As they both knew back then, these tokens meant they would stay together no matter where fate took them. In their world, these little bears were the ultimate symbol of that childhood promise. Alara loved the sentiment, but Alistair thought the whole idea was the most embarrassing thing in the world. Still, he kept it because Arthur insisted the stubborn little bear on the charm looked exactly like him. Alara had found the charm once belonging to Alistair while cleaning out her late friend's old quarters. Holding it brought back a wave of nostalgia. She explained it was on her desk where she could always see it. Alistair finally smiled, agreeing that the bear looked just as disobedient as his old friend Arthur used to be. Finally, the time comes for Alara to depart, and she gives her quiet, somber goodbyes. But instead of walking away normally, she bolts out, leaving the main character confused by her strange flight. Now watch this part carefully. Alara had to run because she was deeply embarrassed, unable to speak, yet still loyal to her late friend's memory. She could not admit her feelings for Alistair today, but she swore she would not hide them next time. Later, inside a cold stone cell at the young offender's keep, the latest rumors were being discussed. The messy-haired boy joked about how Julian had finally been turned into a eunuch. He still could not believe Alistair used a 1 million volt lightning stone on Julian's most sensitive and private spot. Alistair asked why the boy was there. He revealed he had caused trouble just to keep him company. Before the next question, he confessed that being interrogated was actually quite exciting. The main character asked how his new cellmate managed to get him out of solitary confinement. The warden said the area was guarded. Yet, he not only freed him but also managed to bring a shock wand. Since he was the one who exposed Julian's crimes, Alistair demanded to know his true identity and name. Despite the interrogation, the boy kept his secrets. He had already proven his loyalty through his actions in the dark. In response, the protagonist rewarded him with a signet ring that made him punch the air with joy. Getting to the point, Alistair asked what kind of help his new ally truly wanted from him. You and I both know that silence is never a good sign, especially when your ally suddenly falls fast asleep. Alistair felt the conversation stalling, but under the pale moonlight of the May night, he gripped that bare charm from his old friend, determined to finish what he started. That same night, far from the dungeon, an ornate luxury carriage approached through the dark, ancient forest. Lady Helena stepped out, relieved to survive the bumpy trip. She was a high-ranking Silver Dragon associate. She was really curious to know why Duke Valerius built his grand spire on such a remote mountain peak. As the second in command of the most powerful house, he could have bought any castle in the city. He clearly had strange tastes. She hurried into the meeting room, apologizing for her late arrival at the spire. When she realizes what is happening, she quickly apologizes. Broken stone and wreckage littered the floor. She had not realized he was in the middle of training. Sir Galahad served her a cup of herbal brew, explaining they had just finished, while Helena commented that the mountain air was quite refreshing. The Duke was glad she enjoyed the trip, but cut to the chase, asking for her report. Sir Galahad reveals he has news about the young master. Looking at the Duke's face, it was clear he would not show any mercy in this urgent matter. Within the annex of the Duke's fortress, the three leaders gathered in the war room, eager to discuss the fate of the Duke's legendary son. Stick with me, because Alistair's rise through the prison ranks is only getting more legendary. All right, you and I are about to see Julian crush those so-called elites from House Dragonstone. With that kind of lethal speed, the boy is clearly on a whole different level. Helena could only nod, feeling a bit foolish for ever thinking the other squires stood a chance. In her mind, she was certain that Lord Dragonstone must be incredibly proud of his son's growth. But to the Lord, Julian wasn't a knight yet. He wasn't a blooming flower, just a tiny little sprout. He was barely a seedling just starting to take root. Even after weeks in the Citadel, the boy had only faced a few low-level gang leaders, nothing truly worthy of his lineage. In the Duke's eyes, a true son of the dragon should have achieved something far more legendary by now. To give him that necessary push, the Duke decides it's time to trigger the forced bloom method on his own flesh and blood. Back in the grim reality of the Citadel, a blood-curdling scream suddenly terrifies three young inmates. Now watch this part carefully. Cedric orders them to start the fire immediately, ignoring their desperate attempts to understand. They claim it was just a joke, but talk without action is the one thing that truly enrages this prisoner. You see, before he was thrown behind these cold stone walls, he was just an ordinary student, or maybe not so ordinary, considering how he loved to discipline anyone in his way. He especially hated Master Kendrick. Based on his logic, the teacher was just a loudmouth who never backed up his words with power. So, he made sure to shut that loudmouth up permanently, using his own brutal methods. In another life, his other victims could barely even stand, but Cedric forced them up anyway. He eventually landed in the Citadel for defying the king's laws and extreme violence. Back to the present. A lackey brings news about the newcomer. The word reaching Cedric is that Julian thinks he is the new king of this concrete jungle. Naturally, he decides it's time to put the brat in his place. Meanwhile, over in another dark corner of the prison, back in our hero's cell, Nathaniel gives a deep bow of respect to his returning master, and the others follow. You saw that too, right? Everyone is treating Julian like a high lord now, even if it's super awkward. Anyway, James mentions that Julian looks sharp, and the protagonist returns the compliment with a nod. Julian asks if anything went wrong while he was away, but his friends insist everything was perfectly quiet. However, our hero notices a fresh face among the prisoners. Nathaniel explains that the new guy is a bit slow, but he seems like a decent person. Suddenly, a guard appears, banging his baton against the heavy door of cell 36. He barks that everyone is on outdoor labor duty this afternoon, and they better be ready in 5 minutes. Back in Lord Dragonstone's chambers, he recalls an ancient ritual known as the Serpent's Pit, used to forge the ultimate weapon. They would throw dozens of venomous beasts into a jar until only one survived, inheriting the concentrated malice and power of all the others. In a dark twist, this juvenile prison is becoming that very jar, and the inmates are the poisonous insects. Julian is being forced to devour them all to reach his true potential. Helena is worried about these insects, but the Duke reveals he's already sent a monster inside. A very, very dangerous type of predator. Back inside, Cedric hears that Julian's entire crew is out working behind the North Wing, away from any prying eyes. It's the perfect opportunity. He's absolutely livid that Julian is acting so confident and is ready to end this right now. His subordinate asks if they need a reason to attack, but Cedric doesn't care about status or justifications when it comes to blood. In fact, Cedric has already decided that today will be Julian's very last day among the living. Somewhere else in the yard, deep red stains cover the body of prisoner 7199. Julian's friends find him slumped on the ground and scream in pure terror. Nathaniel demands to know who made his leader bleed, but the hero stands up, giving them a heart attack. He explains that he's just exhausted from trying to scrub off all this red paint from his tunic. Anyway, the long day finally ends. Nathaniel is feeling every bone in his body aching, while another cellmate suggests they report the abuse. However, the conversation stops dead when the group spots more of that ominous red liquid smeared across the stone floor. Nathaniel asks if someone is painting again, but Julian realizes this time it's definitely not paint, and everyone starts panicking. After all, the person responsible for that trail of blood was the leader of the rival cell, 37. This was the first move in Lord Dragonstone's master plan, waiting for his son to finally bloom and prove his worth. But he also knew Julian had to be careful, because one wrong move could see his roots cut before he ever reached his full power. As we talked about those poisonous insects earlier, the Lord made sure to put one of his absolute best inside. And trust me, you and I are definitely going to want to see where this enemy is lurking. All right, you and I are back with Julian's father, who's determined to test if his son can survive this brutal new trial. A while back in Dungeon Cell 36, things were shifting as the guards brought in a newcomer who looked anything but friendly. While most captives were terrified since Julian was away in solitary, a few were actually quite impressed. The guy looked exactly like a notorious thug from the capital. That's why Sir Nicholas nervously asked what crime got him arrested. They all started guessing it was a major heist or even a bloody murder. But just when they expected an answer, the boy just shouted total nonsense, acting completely unhinged while making strange bird noises like tweet tweet and chirp chirp. At least that's what they assumed, until they saw the tiny sparrow he had actually smuggled inside with him. The boy claimed he found the bird nearby, but the others demanded to know why he brought it. He explained he felt pity for the abandoned creature even if the dungeon was no place for a nest. Suddenly, the bird took flight, and the boy started chasing it like a madman. In the end, Nicholas realized this new guy was just another pathetic loser rather than a real threat. However, James kept watching him from the shadows. Stick with me here, because that bird landed right on the drawer where Julian's personal belongings were kept. Back in the present at the bathhouse, Nicholas mentions how insane everything feels now that Julian is finally out of solitary confinement. When that gang leader was taken to the healers, he apparently had 23 broken bones. Nicholas is terrified just thinking about the recovery time, and since there were no guards around, the question remains, who did it? Without a doubt, James is starting to view that strange new boy as his primary suspect. While they were painting the castle walls, there was a brief moment where the boy vanished from sight. Plus, he had a red stain on his boot that James knew wasn't paint. From personal experience, that was definitely fresh blood. When you combine that with the fresh scars all over the rookie's body, it's clear he was just in a massive fight. Noticing his friend is totally distracted, Julian calls out to him so they can finally leave. But that's the perfect opening for Nicholas to speak his mind. He publicly points out the suspicious bruises and heavy scars covering the new boy's skin. So once again, they demand to know if he belongs to a guild and what he did before. The boy just replies that they are old marks from the beatings his father gave him years ago. But that excuse makes our hero even more worried. Years ago, right before combat training, while the other students were looking for their sparring gear, most of them froze because of what they saw. The student in the back was 𝒀𝒂𝒌𝒖��, famous for being tortured by a father who led a dangerous syndicate. Some thought he should tell the knights, but everyone knew his father was far too terrifying to cross. Julian's classmates felt terrible for his situation. Now, in the washroom, the other captives are just making crude jokes and comparing sizes. It's just typical locker room talk, but James refuses to let his guard down for a second. You and I can see he's focused. He wonders if he's overthinking it, but those scars on the rookie are just too haunting. Even our protagonist gets lost in thought. Suddenly, the boy breaks the silence by asking for soap, which Julian hands over without a word. That's when the boy asks if the hero actually feels some sort of pity for him. But Julian just asks if he looks like the type to feel sorry for anyone, especially since they both grew up in the same kind of hell. Anyway, our hero says his goodbyes and tells his companion to head out when he's finished. However, a few minutes later in the washroom, while they're drying off, the boy asks a question. He wants to know where the others went, and Julian says he sent them out early. As for why he did that, Julian asks if the boy also senses that something is seriously wrong here. Specifically, how the scars on his body perfectly match the ones Julian has been hiding for years. Silence fills the room for a tense moment. The boy tries to explain, but Julian suddenly lunges, slamming the newcomer's head into the stone floor. With his hands tight around his throat, he prepares to strike, growling that this is no coincidence. To our hero, it's crystal clear that those specific scars were carved by his own father's hand. Since the newcomer had no tattoos, he wasn't recognized at first, but now it's certain. The Dragon Order sent him. The boy stays silent, and Julian already expected that. So he tells him to keep his mouth shut while he can. Trust me, you and I know he won't be able to last much longer. Stick with me. We're going back years to the House Draconis estate. Helena reported she had finished gathering the group of talented young squires for his secret mission. These boys were future elites, all chosen because they had no families or masters. Since even the king knew nothing of this, Lord Roland was free to use these boys however he saw fit. Terror filled the boys' faces, while the Grand Duke took a moment to judge Helena's work. But he hated them immediately, calling every single one of those gifted boys pure trash. It was obvious they couldn't take a single life, and what he needed was a savage hound capable of tearing into its prey. So he ordered her to keep only the largest boy and simply throw the others away, leaving Helena stunned after all her hard work. While the Duke's back was turned, one small boy lunged at the big one, sinking teeth into his throat. Seeing that brutal lack of hesitation, the Duke smiled. Those were the eyes of a true predator he needed. From then on, that child was allowed to call Lord Roland father. Back in the present, the newcomer finally speaks while being pinned against the wall. He comes right out and says he is the Duke's hunting dog, leaving Julian shocked and very worried. It was odd that the boy had no crests, making him a private weapon of the Duke instead of a house soldier. Either way, Julian keeps pressing the suspicious boy against the stone, demanding some real answers now. If he really is a high-tier hound, why the hell are they sharing the same prison cell? Pay attention here. Julian demands to know why the boy killed the Block 37 leader after just watching from afar. All Julian wants to know is why the Duke really sent this boy here in the first place. The boy stays silent as Julian grips his throat, but the protagonist eventually snaps and begins to squeeze harder. Using both hands, he asks if the boy will stay silent before dragging him violently across the prison walls, smashing everything at absolute blinding speed. He finishes by hurling the newcomer into the corner with insane force. Blood spills, but Julian refuses to let go of the boy's neck. Dark memories of being beaten as a child by that same man were finally starting to bubble up. Julian's eyes burn with an insane bloodlust, and his hands tighten with a strength that could crush bone. This was the boy's last chance to give a convincing explanation for being there. But just as Julian expected an answer, he realized the supposed spy had already passed out cold. You and I can see he didn't even try to resist, which makes the Duke's true plans feel even more dangerous. By next morning, a loud bird is screeching and pecking away, waking everyone up for the day. Ben, one of the cellmates, yells at the bird to shove off before he completely loses his mind. Julian kept feeling that something was wrong, yet after days of watching, he saw no suspicious behavior from the boy. On purpose, Nigel and Guy pretend to trip so they can dump a food tray right on the rookie. But everything stayed normal, even through all the threats and intimidation. Despite being humiliated, the boy never became hostile or reacted with any aggression. Since they were being discreet, they didn't push too far, but Julian was fully aware his father had a dark reason for sending this boy. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Julian gets a massive blast of water right to the face. Julian asks if he is all right, but Nigel and Guy look far more terrified since they hit their leader instead of the rookie. Even without taking action, that rookie still radiated a strange, dark intent that Julian couldn't ignore. Later that night, amidst a howling wind, Nigel swore he was going to kill someone by the morning. They were furious about being forced to clean the hillside when they should have been fast asleep. Only the 4 of them were out there, so Julian told them to finish up and get back inside. Julian thought this situation was incredibly strange, especially since the guards chose only the 4 of them for this late-night work. As they continue hacking away at the thick weeds, the rookie asks if Julian is actually close with his father, which leaves the prince completely confused. But for the newcomer, this confusion was the only signal he needed to finally launch his attack after days of waiting. Trust me, Nigel just picked the absolute worst moment to interrupt and ask for a trade. All right, you and I are diving into a brutal clash, where Alistair is the first to shout a warning to the others. Lady Alara arrives instantly, demanding to know what kind of chaos has broken out in the courtyard. The recruit's bloody blade told the whole story, mockery dripping from his lips about Alistair being far too late. There was no more point in hiding the Duke's true intentions. This was a direct assassination attempt meant to spill blood. We jump back to Duke Roderick's fortress not too long ago, where the recruit was praised for his sharp wit. He finally possessed the fangs of a war hound, ready to tear through any enemy's throat. The boy swore he would execute anyone without hesitation if his father demanded it. That was music to the Duke's ears, exactly the kind of weapon he needed for his games. Conveniently, Roderick informed him that his timing was perfect to assist with a very specific, high-stakes request. The first task: infiltrate Alistair's borders and eliminate every single piece of outside interference he could find. Second, he had to stalk Alara's daily routine and pinpoint every noble closest to the young lord. Now pay attention, because the third task was the most twisted, killing those loyal knights right in front of Alistair. All of this was designed to mold him into the ultimate heir, just as Alistair had already feared. 2 knights comment that the Duke is completely insane, which sends a chill down the recruit's spine as if he saw a ghost. Despite being struck in their vital points, both Alistair and his brave knights were somehow still standing tall. As a precaution, they had hidden thick leather padding under their tunics, saving them from a certain death. Alistair knew the Duke wanted to harden his son, but he never imagined his father would resort to such disgusting, underhanded methods again. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical blade. Regardless, it should not be a surprise that the Duke remains the same vile monster he has always been. With clear proof of the recruit's treason, Alistair sends him flying across the stone floor with a devastating punch. Alistair is done playing these games. Years ago, that recruit was tossed aside by the very man who should have been his father, left to rot in the cold. Then he was abandoned once more by his mother, forced to endure a humiliating rejection that scarred his soul forever. In the end, even the masters of the foundling home turned their backs on him. When he turned to the city's slums and a life of crime, his new gang of thieves sold him out for a few coins. Upon his arrival, the buyers only complained that he was too scrawny and weak to be worth the gold they paid. They whispered about his uselessness, already planning to pass the broken boy onto someone else like common trash. But in that moment of total abandonment, the boy chose to seize his own destiny and fled into the dark night. I know what you're thinking. He just wanted a home. He'd do anything for anyone as long as they didn't leave him. That was the tragic past of the new squire from Lady Alara's unique perspective. When she found him wandering like a lost pup, she simply picked him up and presented him to the commander. For Sterling, the boy's blind loyalty was clearly born from a fear of being alone, a trait the lady found quite fascinating. Now it's a duel to the death between two pawns. After that massive hit, Alistair tells his men to go ahead and summon the royal wardens to the scene. The knights wonder why they must call for aid, instead of standing and fighting by his side. Alistair explains that every event until now was a carefully staged trap. He knows for a fact that the palace will try to cover up the blood. To stop that from happening, Alistair orders them to hurry. The wardens need to be here to collect a fresh corpse. Watching from the shadows, the tattoo artist of the Crimson Order wonders which of these two will survive the night. In Sterling's eyes, the only thing they share is that they were both forged in the Duke's brutal training pits. As the two boys clash again, they trade thunderous punches, reeling back in perfect unison like mirror images. The similarity is eerie as they strike and parry with the exact same nightly footwork. They throw hooks at the same microsecond and deliver matching kicks to the gut, their movements flowing in a terrifying, identical rhythm. Alistair's breathing grows heavy and ragged, yet the recruit shows no signs of fatigue or slowing down. Neither warrior has an ounce of quit in them, so the mirrored carnage continues without a single break. Sterling knows their fighting styles are twins, and he bets they are both stunned by how well they know each other. Alara asks for his final verdict on the winner. Back in the fray, the recruit screams about how their skills are identical. He slams a fist into Alistair's stomach, but the young lord refuses to accept they are equal. Catching the recruit's arm before the impact, he grips it tight to perform a bone-shattering wrestling maneuver. Despite having the same master, the protagonist proves that his true prowess is on an entirely different level. And trust me, that final blow shattered more than just the recruit's skull. You and I just saw a legend born. All right, you and I are about to see if Julian survives this absolute madness. This time he is the one grabbing Julian's arm, mocking him for mastering the Duke's twisting arts so well. As he struggles to copy the move, Julian warns him that raw strength will never be enough here. Then, Julian realizes in the worst way that the boy had one more vicious trick up his sleeve. 2 fingers are bitten clean off. Julian groans in pain, sending the boy flying with a heavy kick. The bastard did not care about honor or form. He only cared about the kill. He admits he was just following the Duke's orders to end Julian's life. Hearing his father's name from this monster's mouth sends Julian into a blind rage. Julian kicks him again, telling him to shut his mouth. The boy hits the dirt, seemingly finished. From the perspective of the royal seer, she did not believe it was possible for that orphan to defeat Julian in a fair fight, and Galahad agreed, but only as long as they were unarmed. Watch closely here. Once the weapons come out, everything changes for these two. A lock of Julian's hair is sliced instantly. The Duke once gave the orphan advice he still follows today. He told the boy he had a gift for blades and should use them now. Every scar on his body is proof of the Duke's brutal training with those twin blades. He does not care how strong Julian is or why he is even here. Being the Duke's true-born son means nothing to a cold-blooded killer like him. Today is the day he fulfills his mission of killing Julian with his own hands, just as the Duke ordered. Julian, however, simply responds by recalling his earlier warning. He told him that if he wanted a painless death, he should keep the Duke's name quiet. Yet, The kid dared to mention his father's title 4 separate times. Julian cannot believe his enemy forgot the true son also knows the way of the blade. Conveniently, Julian ends up finding a heavy timber saw nearby that will help him carve through skin and bone alike. Since he spoke the name 4 times, Julian promises to carve him into 4 bloody pieces as punishment. The greatest knight in the history of the Midlands was Sir Arthur the Great, known for winning over 60 legendary duels. The specialized sword style he mastered was called the twin fang stance. This was a combat style that soon became the nightmare of every swordsman for its sheer destructive power. During this fierce clash between the Duke's 2 sons, Julian realizes his opponent is actually mimicking that legendary twin fang stance. With blinding speed and psychological pressure, the boy creates a storm of unpredictable, irregular cuts. He is far more dangerous than Julian expected. Their eyes meet as a massive shockwave erupts. To the orphan, Julian's saw is just a common tool used for cutting timber. It is a far cry from the refined sword arts passed down through the centuries. You saw that too, right? He thinks Julian is just an amateur with a wood saw. This orphan had lived for the sword, training with the twin blades the Duke personally gave him. He learned every vital organ and artery. If he strikes right, his target is finished. But enemies are not puppets. They fight and resist, making it almost impossible to aim accurately during the chaos of real combat. That said, what they needed to do was strike without hesitation and erase any chance of Julian's survival. Remember, a hunting dog that fails its master's task is only fit for the grave. With the final test coming tomorrow, the jailer let the young boys rest one last time. The orphan sat alone in the shadows until someone asked about his growling stomach. A kind boy named Henry asked if he was the new recruit brought by the Duke, offering to share a hot plate of his famous fried rice. He was friendly and promised it was the best meal in the castle. Despite being suspicious, the hungry orphan ate like he had not seen food in days. Henry knew the orphan was brought there because he had no family left. He introduced himself with a warm smile and promised that from that moment on, they would always help each other. Trust me, you and I are not going to like how Henry's story ends. In any case, the next morning, the High Duke watched as the trials finally began. All right, you and I are about to see how a heartless baron chooses his hounds. For him, only someone with unwavering cruelty is fit to serve as his personal hunting dog. And so, the baron tosses twin daggers at the boy's feet. From this moment on, those cold steel blades would be his fangs. The orphan was cast out, even by common outlaws. But Lord Roland took him in, giving him a new life. To the boy, the baron was his true father. As they clash, our hero gets cornered. Desperation grows, and the hound attacks everything in his path like a beast. Whether they were friends or total strangers didn't matter. He'll slaughter everyone, including Julian. He lunges forward, aiming his fangs straight for the neck. Mid-swing, the orphan notices something feels off. Julian looks like the perfect prey, but even the biggest predators are usually forced to back down under this level of pressure. Watch closely. Why are his eyes so calm? Years ago, Julian's father forced a knife into his hand to kill him. Roland said one strike is enough. Hitting the vitals is all that matters. Don't count the strikes, his father warned. Dodge the fatal hits and wait for the perfect opening. Wield the sword ready to kill, or that same blade will pierce your heart. The fierce battle between the two continues now. Steel meat saw as the orphan prepares a finishing blow. But Julian is ready. He's been enduring the pain on purpose. The hound sneers, claiming this final strike will end it. But as he closes in, Julian finds the opening, and trust me, you and I are about to see blood. Julian waited for this moment. This serrated blade is clumsy, especially since with a real sword. The enemy's head would be rolling instead of that branch. His father's cold advice echoes back to him now. But a saw has distinct advantages. Jagged teeth tearing through bone cause more agony than any clean sword strike. The pain he's about to inflict is haunting. The orphan mocks him, questioning Julian's sudden confidence. Can a man who's never killed actually do it? He laughs, threatening to hunt down Julian's loved ones. He vows to bury a blade in Julian's chest. Julian finally gets serious after that threat, noting that the boy has a talent for irritating others before ending the fight with one final, decisive strike. However, the steel doesn't hit its mark as intended, breaking in half at the exact moment of impact. In the end, Julian decides he doesn't need to finish the job himself since he's already won. He'll simply leave the boy to bleed until he passes out, but the hound knew better. Julian broke the steel on purpose when he pulled back, but the hound's fractured mind couldn't understand why. Back at the dungeon infirmary, a prisoner screams out. He yells that the newcomer stabbed him. Meister Gemma notes the wound isn't even deep. They argue over the chaos, but when Julian stands up, Gemma demands to know what he actually did to leave his opponent in such a horrific and grave state. This, however, first, his father intended to hurt those nearby and provoke his hidden rage. Secondly, by putting innocent lives in danger to create as much chaos as possible. Finally, the Baron's strategy was simple. You and I know he wants a murderer. If he did it, he would have crossed the final moral line he had fought so hard to maintain as a man. In that moment, if the orphan had not looked so desperate to die, Julian might have actually finished the job. Trust me, Julian realized Lord Roland was still trying to mold him, and his new, terrifying aura absolutely disgusted everyone around him. Nathan asks if the young lord wants to be moved to a private cell for his own safety. But Julian stays silent, not wanting his father to think that seizing control of the dungeon was his actual goal. Even so, Julian was determined to handle every other threat in this place on his own terms. Inside a carriage racing away from the prison, the orphan was treated by a healer while under heavy guard. He eventually wakes up, but he cannot understand why his heart is still beating. The cold air reminds him of a dark memory from when two men were trying to restrain a dog. In their eyes, even a beast should know it is being abandoned after it fails to catch its prey. When a prime hunting hound fails to do its job, this is the only fate that awaits it. Lord Roland once said a broken tool is useless and expressed his deep disappointment in a hound that would not work. Even as a child, he ordered the boy to be cast out, and that memory fills him with pure despair. The boy tears off his bandages and runs, terrified of being left behind by the only family he knows. If he returns a failure, he will be discarded, so he must finish his mission at any cost. Watch this part closely. The exit is blocked by a shadow from the past asking the boy if he was trying to escape. Sir Gareth explains that any hound trying to break its leash is immediately put down by the master. He asks for final words, and the boy simply begs to be killed before he is abandoned once again. Moments later, Gareth answers a call to report that the messy situation has finally been resolved. When they first checked the carriage, the boy was still clinging to life despite his grave injuries. But as expected from the young master, that brutal arm challenge was not enough to kill him. During a meeting with other powerful lords, Roland hangs up, promising to get in touch later. One nobleman expresses his sincere hope that nothing tragic has happened to the lord's son. Roland erupts into uncontrolled laughter, making the others think that something great has just occurred. You and I know Roland is complicated, but he hates showing his hand and claims children rarely follow their parents' wishes. In the end, his son did not kill the prey he was sent, even when the opportunity was handed to him. Now, the Lord believes a much more guaranteed way is needed to properly educate his heir. Suddenly, another call comes in from the dungeon, and Roland answers the summons immediately. On the other end, the warden screams that something absolutely horrible is happening in the prison. Julian, the heir of Lord Roland, had just been involved in a terrible accident after he started a massive riot in the laundry rooms. Roland demands the warden explain exactly how his son managed to cause such a commotion. After recovering, Julian walked right into a nest of vipers to provoke every enemy in the room. This move puts him in fatal danger, and the warden fears he will not make it out alive this time. Many years ago during the winter, Roland traveled to the frozen wastes of the far north. It was a lawless land, where he went to strike a massive weapons deal with the local mercenaries. He found only piles of dead soldiers and a giant, monstrous bear waiting for him in the snow. In that moment, the great Roland felt a chill of absolute, paralyzing fear deep in his soul. He later told Julian he hunted the beast himself to prove that danger can always be conquered. According to the Lord's own words, Roland made a point of saying that victory is possible as long as you know how to deal with that. Julian was finally coming of age, and it was time to plant this brutal idea in his mind. To transcend human limits, one must possess a transcendent heart of cold, tempered steel that knows no fear. The father wanted Julian to grow strong, but only within a safe, controlled environment of his choosing. He did not want his heir dead, but Julian refused to be a puppet in his father's game. So, what do you and I think? Those prisoners had no idea what kind of madness they just stepped into. All right, you and I are about to watch Julian pull the most dangerous stunt his father, Lord Rowan, ever feared. Locked deep in the Iron Keep, the other convicts quickly realized exactly what was going down. See, all the gold was hidden inside the washroom vats. The men panicked, knowing that coin was the only bribe keeping the warden from executing them. Julian knew their game well. In this moment, the prisoners realized talking wasn't going to save them. But Julian didn't wait. He struck first, daring every single one of them to come at him. The mob swarmed him instantly, but he swept them aside like the pathetic weaklings they truly were. He was only hunting the ringleaders. Hearing this, one fool charged out, swearing he'd never take orders from Julian. Too bad for him. He ended up just like the rest, face first in the dirt after one brutal punch. By the time the dust settled, every man in the laundry room was out cold on the floor. Finally, a true block lord appeared. Surveying the carnage Julian left behind, he told his men they had to step in. Still, no matter how many low-level thugs blocked his path, Julian kept moving. He knew he wasn't in any real danger. Seeing he was barely scratched, the leaders knew their plan had failed. It was a scruffy boy who actually moved the merchant gold when Julian ordered the theft. There was no way the other block lords were going to let this insult slide quietly. Now pay attention here. Even the kid had no idea how Julian planned to survive this mess. He couldn't see a way out, but he was dying to know what would happen next. Later, in a dark corner of the keep, Julian sat alone. He waited until a heavy shadow began walking slowly his way. This was Baron Gareth, a massive, hostile, bald man with a reputation for absolute brutality. He'd heard Julian dumped his gold in the vats. Julian just coolly replied he was only taking what he wanted. The Baron sneered, telling him he clearly didn't understand how deep of a hole he'd dug. He asked Julian if he really thought only one ringleader would come to collect for this insult. In fact, the whole dungeon was fuming. Sir Justin, leader of the fourth block, already hated Julian's guts from their last meeting. Knight Silas from Block 17 just laughed, claiming he loved nothing more than breaking a strong man. The Miller twins, ruling Blocks 12 and 13, were also looking for Julian's head on a platter. Meanwhile, Hugh was absolutely desperate after losing all his coin. At this rate, Lord Simon, the leader of the 7th block, warned that every merchant shop would have to close down. Then there was Jude from Block 19, who thought they should hunt Julian's family instead. His friends could only watch from their cells in pure terror. After all, Julian was now standing alone against every single block lord in the entire fortress. Ned felt the shift in the air. No meeting was scheduled, and the atmosphere felt like it could turn deadly any second. Suddenly, another voice called out, offering Julian one final chance to beg for his life. This was Lord Marcus, the undisputed master of the first block. You and I both know Julian heard the offer, but let's be real, these monsters weren't actually going to listen. In their world, anyone who breaks the order is marked for death. That's the one thing these criminals agree on. Back then, Julian's father tried to teach him how to break past human limits. It was called the ascendant core, a state where you use raw emotion to transcend the physical mind and body. Essentially, it supercharges every human ability. Lord Rowan told him to watch closely as he prepared a final demonstration. With a single slap to the earth, he snuffed out every candle in the room. That was his last lesson as a father. Back in the present, as the Lord's fists closed in, Julian began to steady his racing heart. Then, in the blink of an eye, he unleashed a dual strike that hit both of them perfectly. They crumpled like rag dolls. Even Julian's allies were stunned, and for the first time, the other leaders felt true fear. It was unreal. Julian had just decimated 2 legendary block lords with a single, effortless move. The scruffy boy was loving the chaos. Julian was causing a total riot, and he wondered how this would end. But he realized the truth now. Julian wasn't looking for an escape, he was planning to crush them all. Julian had always hated the power his father forced on him, even if refusing it meant his own death. But looking at the monsters surrounding him, you and I can see he doesn't have much of a choice anymore. Let's dive into a world where humans do the impossible, like a mother flipping a whole carriage to save her child. In 1779, a man swam the frozen North Sea for 12 hours just to escape a tyrant's rule. Centuries ago in the southern lands, a warrior fought for 47 seconds after his heart stopped, fueled by revenge. Superhuman phenomena like these occur when humans shatter their own mortal limits. This is not about fate, but the raw power of emotion. Emotions, amplified so much they physically alter the human body. Called the sovereign will, it is the only way to transcend human limits. And in this very moment, the emotion flooding Silas's heart as he reached the sovereign stage was nothing other than a pure, burning hatred directed at the dark figure of his father, the King Roland. In the office, the warden despairs, asking if this is real. Silas and the other commanders were doing the unthinkable in the courtyard. Back in the fight, Silas says he'd rather die than use this. But it seemed Silas had no choice, especially since he needed to fill his head with painful thoughts of his father to activate this ability, the absolute worst-case scenario. This was the ultimate nightmare. One enemy mocks him, laughing as Silas continues to whisper to himself as if he were caught in the middle of a dark monologue. Now pay attention. See what happens when he advances, calling the boy a loner and vowing to end this annoying brat once and for all. He was the only one who truly knew what it meant to be alone. Unlike the other commanders, Julian lived in silence, finding even the sound of happy voices to be a sharp insult. In his twisted mind, he was just disciplining brats while the world began to treat him as a demon. Regardless of that, the man takes a thunderous blow to the gut, flying backward and sending terror through his fellow commanders. Silas snaps that nobody cares. Suddenly, Alistair strikes from the shadows, aiming for the boy's heel. He dreams of the sound, the sickening snap of tendons, and the sweet music of tearing flesh. That vibration in his ears, it gives him chills of pure pleasure. Julian was a musical prodigy, until the day everything changed forever. But his story ends with a brutal fist to the jaw, sending this side character straight back to irrelevance. In the holding cells, the other prisoners can't believe their eyes. How did he crush 4 titans so fast? Silas doesn't show a flicker of fear. He tells the remaining guards to keep coming. One brave fool takes the bait, charging forward and slamming the boy against the wall. Now it is Victor's turn. In his life, defeat is a word that does not exist, or rather, he simply could not afford to let it enter his dictionary. You and I know, to protect his people, he simply needed to win no matter what. However, in a truly hilarious twist, he also had his face smashed with a single blow, making him fly like a bird and land like a rotten tomato. Silas warns the rest. While this power is active, he is virtually invincible. The twins attack, believing this time will be different. Caleb and Connor initiate the charge, bringing along a dark past. They were newborn babies who never even got to look into their mother's eyes. As the years passed, those cold looks from strangers sharpened into years of brutal abuse. But now Silas is the one delivering the pain, throwing punches so savage they cut through their flashbacks. Their biggest mistake, mentioning the word family to a man betrayed by his own. From the roof, a messy-haired noble watches, wondering what gives this boy the gall to cause this chaos. It is obvious Silas has an ace up his sleeve. Finally, Si-jin steps up, a warrior who loves the strong. Status or gender does not matter to him. He only has a thing for strong people. The world is vast and people have all kinds of tastes. But for him, the entire world was now reduced to Silas's hand, crushing his face against the cold stone floor. After that display of strength, the last one appears. He is impressed. Silas took them all down. He vows to fight with the honor of the Royal Drake Guard. The final showdown is here. Silas faces a true master of the Dragon House who is ready for war. And trust me, we are about to witness an epic clash between these two powers. All right, you and I are watching as the night fades, and dawn reveals the fallen state of the final captain, meaning 9 lords were crushed. Even though he emerged victorious, the struggle lasted much longer than Arthur had originally anticipated. The warden stood there, face white as a ghost, like he was witnessing a legendary play unfold before him. Lord Raymond still had no clue what was happening and desperately needed to know if his son was safe. But in a flash, our hero was already looming over the warden with the expression of a cold-blooded assassin. It was effortless to seize the device and join the conversation with whoever was waiting on the other line. Since he knew exactly who the warden was reporting to, Arthur simply gave his father a calm, chilling greeting. As morning returned to the Black Keep, a certain messy-haired boy started clapping with pure, unadulterated joy. That fight was a masterpiece, a clash that belonged in history, and he felt like a fool for not recording it. But just being there to witness something so grand with his own eyes made him incredibly happy. The boy wondered what he should do now, fearing he would never feel such a rush of euphoria again. At least, that is what he believed, shackling his entire destiny to those cold stone walls. In the call between father and son, Arthur spoke to the old lord again. Alone in his manor, Lord Raymond asked if he was being fed. Arthur explained that the dungeon rations actually suited his highborn palate surprisingly well. But that wasn't all. He even mentioned the luxury of warm water and his scheduled training sessions. He claimed life here was better than his time at the manor, except for the monotonous daily routine. Thanks to a certain gift his father recently sent, things had also become much less tedious. Hearing this, Lord Raymond admitted it was a huge relief to know his son was faring so well. But getting straight to the point, he asked what drove Arthur to pull such a reckless stunt. The hero responded that he intends to leave that place and break the chains that control the keep. His father tried to confirm the plan, but the answer was immediate. Arthur had realized something that changed everything. Now watch closely. He realized this hell, which he once thought was just fiction, truly exists. Then he suddenly cut his father off. He simply advised the old man to keep his neck clean for the day the blade finally falls. Though that day was still far off, it left the lord in deep thought. Meanwhile, the warden was busy punishing his staff. It seemed they were all begging to be fired, since not one of them could stop a single sector captain. The warden knew Arthur was in real danger despite the many sentinels, so they offered their apologies. The scale of the incident was so massive that the warden feared Arthur had become impossible to control. At that moment, one of the sentinels began to understand exactly what the warden was trying to say. His intention now was to transfer Arthur to the pit, the place of no return. The warden wanted to avoid this at all costs, knowing Lord Raymond would lose his mind. No father would want his son sent to such a hole. Back inside our hero's barracks, he admitted they may have overdone it, but at least he secured plenty of fine food for the whole group. They hadn't even asked, yet they found themselves at a lavish feast with double the usual rations. Because of this, everyone put Arthur on a pedestal. One swore to be his brother, while another promised to bow daily. However, Nabi went a step further. strangely declaring himself to be Arthur's most loyal hunting dog. Even so, the others agreed that Arthur was far from just any ordinary commander. For his deeds, he is the king of the first barracks, the man who crushed 9 lords alone. This meant their barracks was now the most powerful, and they were officially the masters of the keep. You see that too, right? Arthur is eating, but he notices Gideon is acting very strange. Sensing the odd vibe, Gideon asked Arthur what he was up to, as did Nobby. But he didn't answer, telling his friends to eat their fill first, since feasts like this would soon be rare. Nobby didn't understand why he said to eat while they could, but Arthur simply placed a heavy tome on his chest. Seeing how naturally Nobby could spin a lie, our hero believed the boy was actually quite clever. So, he told him to start studying, giving Nobby enough confidence to think he could enter the Royal Academy. Trust me, you and I will want to see what Gideon's gift is. Stick with me, Nigel is jealous of Julian's diary, but our hero noticed him scribbling alone and decided to offer him a gift. He gave Nigel the book so he could write to his family and tell them they needn't worry about him anymore. Since Julian has no family left to write to, he figured Nigel should be the one using the pages. In the end, the two of them realize there is something very strange about our hero Julian. First he asked for a massive chicken feast, and now he is giving his things away and speaking as if he is leaving forever. Julian doesn't hide the truth, knowing Nigel is way too sharp to miss the obvious signs that their time together is ending. Right then, a guard appears and calls prisoner 1799 to gather his belongings and leave immediately. He asks if they have finished their goodbyes, leaving everyone in the cell completely stunned and confused. At first, they assume he is just being thrown into another dark solitary confinement unit. Julian explains that because of the chaos he caused, his friends won't be seeing him in this prison anymore. He says he has a mission to complete, and leaving this cell is part of his plan to get what he wants. Nigel shouts for him to wait because they haven't had a proper goodbye, but Julian simply thanks him for making his stay interesting. With a smile, he says it was fun but assures them they won't meet again, at least not in this prison. In the end, Nigel can only respond with gratitude for everything Julian did for them. Just like he mentioned before, Julian reminds him that his sentence is still 20 years. He tells Nigel to visit so he won't get bored, but Julian hints that his time behind bars might not actually be that long. Back at the Crimson Citadel, expensive relics are being smashed, and it's much more than just broken glass. Duke Alaric is absolutely furious at his son, enraged that Julian has no idea how much his father truly cares. He believes it wasn't Julian's time to destroy that place yet, because an insect that escapes its jar only finds itself inside a larger jar with a deadlier predator. Now, all the Duke can do is hope his son stays focused on the path ahead. That same night, the guard escorting our hero asks if he has any idea where they are going. Though it is confidential, he believes he can share the secret with him now. Now pay attention. He reveals there is a secret fortress beyond the main dungeon, the second sector of Blackwood Spire, which has never been disclosed to the public before. This is the very first time Julian has ever been so close to that forbidden sector. He knew he had to find a way to escape his father's shadow and eventually take him down. A fellow prisoner with messy hair once shared a dark rumor, an urban legend about a secret dungeon that existed deep within the walls of the spire. Hidden behind the dense trees and the stone walls, there was a place for the truly broken. It seemed like a total myth, a detention center for those who had completely lost their minds. The messy-haired boy was only sharing the rumor for fun, but Julian used that moment to ask for one last favor regarding the cell boss's gold. He planned to steal every bit of gold the local cell leaders used to bribe the corrupt warden. Julian planned to steal every bit of gold the cell leaders used to bribe the corrupt warden, but back in the present, the two finally arrive at the dark and dangerous fortress where our hero will be staying from now on. This is the high-security facility that holds prisoners who are completely out of any kind of control. Trust me, You and I are definitely going to want to see how Julian survives in a dangerous place like this. Inside a luxury sauna, the girl Beatrix is enjoying a 2002 vintage Valerius red wine. Soaking in the hot springs of High Moon Springs made the day perfect, and Beatrix admits that the life of a noble is truly fantastic. She wonders if it is okay to have this much fun, while her young master is trapped in that dungeon. She just hopes he is safe in the second sector, because he will need luck to survive the sharks in there. Back with Julian, he is finally being introduced to the dark prison cell where he will be staying. The guard mentions he heard about all the trouble Julian caused back in the first prison sector. He mocks the boy, wondering if Julian will be able to cause that same chaos in here. The second sector is where they lock up the most uncontrollable monsters, but Julian knows he is completely prepared. As soon as they enter, someone comes to welcome the newcomer, catching our hero Julian completely by surprise. Smiling, the man asks if they have a new member, but he quickly gets incredibly irritated because Julian is so handsome. Julian heard that this was the secret facility, where they kept the most uncontrollable and dangerous criminals. Julian just says he's heading to the infirmary. You and I both know the real chaos is just beginning. So, stick with me, Alistair is about to realize this high-security dungeon is hiding something dark. These prisoners, they look way too calm and controlled for killers. Honestly, the young inmates beside him looked like ordinary commoners. That mystery only made his skin crawl as the uneasy tension started to thicken. The guard mocks his shock at the peaceful atmosphere, but warns him that the terrifying secret behind this place is just about to be revealed. They reach Warden Arthur Sterling's private study, where a massive painting of a blood-soaked great white shark tearing into its prey looms over the entrance. Everything matters: the fish, the reef, the sand, and even the exact water temperature. Beyond that, perfect light for 8 to 12 hours, specific acidity, and a balanced oxygen level. If you can recreate that balance in a simple glass tank, you have mastered an entire ecosystem. Nothing is more beautiful than that harmony. Now pay attention to this guy. Staring into his tank, Warden Arthur Sterling feels like a literal god ruling over his own private world. He built Sector 2 to mirror an aquarium, using absolute order and cold beauty as his foundation. Normal imperial prisons see a 20% death rate, but here in the warden's private aquarium, it is less than a tenth of that. To Sterling, this is a masterpiece, especially considering he is dealing with the realm's most violent criminals. He asks our hero what he thinks of the system, and Alistair doesn't hold back. He has no clue what this madman is talking about. But the warden is determined to make him see the light. He explains that in a tank, fish do not tear each other apart like they do in the wild. The reason? Because in an aquarium isolated from the world, there is always an apex predator at the very top. That predator is a massive shark that dominates everything beneath it. In the open sea, you can run, but in this tank, there is nowhere to hide. The shark's mere presence keeps the smaller fish too paralyzed with fear to fight. Ironically, it is the shadow of the ultimate killer that keeps the peace between everyone else. With that, you see where this is going. Sterling calls Alistair the new shark in his tank, but wait till you hear who this warden actually is. Elena notes he was a world-renowned mind reader and criminal expert who lectured at the great academies across the sea. When he returned to the kingdom to run a juvenile dungeon, he shocked the entire high nobility. Even the Crimson Order found him impossible to control. Unlike other corrupt wardens, Sterling could not be bought with gold or titles. His only obsession was the twisted prison system he perfected, a dark psychological experiment he calls the shark paradox. Knowing a royal institution has such a dark side makes you wonder what the king was thinking. And if we focus on the worst part, it is the warden himself. Honestly, the man is a complete and utter psychopath. Looking at him for the first time, Elena realizes the young master is in grave danger. Back in the office, Alistair asks if he is supposed to be the shark. Sterling just smiles, confirming that every other inmate is just a common fish. As for the rest of it, he will not bore him with details, since the warden has already built the perfect glass world for them to live in. As the apex predator, the warden is the shark who swims wherever he pleases. Alistair just stares back, genuinely having no clue what this lunatic is talking about. Besides, he does not care. If the talk is over, he turns his back to leave. Sterling starts muttering about how there is nothing more thrilling than explaining a master theory to someone who does not get it. Since our hero is one of those people, he lunges at Alistair's throat in a flash, slamming him into the stone wall with enough force to shatter it. Apparently, violence is the only language Alistair will actually understand. The warden of Blackwood Citadel's high-security sector, too, Arthur Sterling, is a scholar of the High Empires who studied forbidden psychology, the most prestigious royal academies. He was world-famous for his research, with the Global Council and the Citadel of Arcanum begging him to join their ranks. Yet he chose to return home. Someone tells the doctor it is an honor he chose their kingdom. But you and I know the real reason they met. They are terrified of him running this dungeon. You and I are starting a story where the kingdom's most violent outcasts have become completely uncontrollable. Lord Winston stepped forward, proposing a radical reformation experiment aimed at these dangerous, highborn delinquents. It took massive influence to gain royal approval within the kingdom's laws. If this fortress experiment fails in this sector, his entire reputation will be lost. In the end, the Crown only agreed to this absurd plan because of Winston's legendary research and his terrifying military might, which allowed him to personally crush any violent criminals during an emergency. After all, he was once a high-ranking officer in the legendary Royal Vanguard elite. He is also a master of human nature, believing his true duty is to study societal chaos firsthand. Driven by this, he grabs our hero Julian by the throat, demanding to know Julian's true nature before launching a punch that shatters the very air itself. Dust clouds explode, but Julian had already vanished. Now, the Lord Warden's curiosity is truly set on fire. In a literal blink, he vanishes and reappears right behind the boy, determined to clarify the doubts burning in his mind. Winston lands a heavy blow squarely in the boy's abdomen, sending him crashing backward through a mahogany table and several personal belongings. Rumors say that 4 elite predators are currently locked in this fortress, and the warden has ranked them all individually. Watch closely now as Winston attacks relentlessly, screaming for Julian to finally show him what kind of predator he really is. He practically begs for it, and finally, the reaction he was searching for happens. Julian holds back his strike, making the warden feel a chill of pure fear before vanishing again, only heightening that terror. Our hero displays a look of absolute confidence, the total opposite of what the Lord Warden imagined until then. But in that very moment, Winston bursts into laughter, shouting that this is bloody spectacular. He immediately summons a guard and commands him to bring a certain mysterious item to the room right away. He explains that within these walls, there exists a rank known as Elite Tier. He personally prefers the name Great White Vipers, but the High Council lacked the humor to approve the title. A velvet box arrives, containing Julian's new uniform and a striking black onyx insignia. In most of the kingdom's prisons, badges mark a prisoner's danger level from common white to the blood red of a murderer. But in this citadel, there are only 2, white for general rabble and black for the special elite. Winston is certain Julian will understand the meaning of that insignia very quickly. After the noise fades, Winston stands alone and begins to mentally review the fact that despite attacking 21 times, Julian had far more openings to strike. Winston was stunned that the boy acted as if the warden didn't even deserve his attention. The moment Julian vanished is the one that remains burned in his memory. You and I are seeing the first case this man can't classify, and he'll do anything to uncover Julian's true identity. For now, he can only observe and wait for the boy to reveal his secrets naturally. Later, in in the shadows of the first-floor barracks of the Reformation Citadel. A sudden scream echoes through the hall. The Viper is coming to their cell. They whisper to their terrified cellmate, but the other tells him not to worry because he has a plan. Their plan was to blind him, use a garrote to end his life, and then dispose of the evidence in the waste pipes to face the monster known as the Viper. Finally, the predator Julian arrives at the door, asking if he has found the right room. Hiding in the darkness, the two take a deep breath, preparing to launch their deadly first strike. Instead, the leader does a total pivot, bowing like a loyal servant to his new master. Victor has no choice but to follow. Julian looks at them, realizing these are the small fish the warden mentioned. Since this is his new communal living area, Julian notes that the room isn't half bad. He simply asks which bed belongs to him. Silas starts promoting the mattress, trying to see if the young master wants to lie down. Julian mentions he will rest after the evening roll call, which should be happening very soon. The two boys just stare at him in total confusion. They explain the guards don't bother them here. In this fortress, prisoners are free to do whatever they please. You and I just saw a place with 0 rules, yet the crime rate is non-existent. Truly terrifying, right? After a brutal day, night falls over the iron spire, casting an eerie, uncomfortable silence through the cold stone corridors. Thomas, however, sleeps like a baby, dreaming of lovely things, like using alchemical acid to make corpses disappear forever. While Arthur is consumed by pure insomnia and terror, the new High Lord of the second section of this dungeon finally wakes up as well. In this hellhole, the royal guards never interfere with the prisoners, yet somehow, the violence stays at an all-time low. Julian stands up, realizing the peace exists for one reason only: the 4 other predatory monsters locked inside these walls. He paces his cell, dwelling on what it truly means to be a High Lord in a place like this. Now pay attention. As the ward stays quiet, he decides it is time to see the monsters for himself. Julian imagines the beasts waiting just beyond the threshold, but when he tries the handle, he gets a massive surprise. For some reason he cannot wrap his head around. His heavy iron cell door is bolted shut from the outside. It seems that even if the High Warden does not get his hands dirty, he still keeps every soul here under his thumb. Julian concludes that there is still a lot about this fortress that he simply does not understand yet. But he is not quitting. The next morning, while Julian sleeps, the low-tier rats conspire to kill him with a sharpened lead pipe. Those 2 cowards are practically fighting each other to see who gets to strike the first blow. Unfortunately for them, Julian snaps his eyes open at that exact second, catching them both red-handed in the act. Fearing for their pathetic lives, Arthur and Thomas dive to the floor, acting like loyal, obedient dogs once again. Julian just asks when the doors open for breakfast, which honestly just leaves the 2 boys looking completely confused. As it turns out, the cell doors were already unlocked, a fact that catches our hero totally off guard. You saw that too, right? Thomas explains that a magical seal locks and unlocks these heavy doors on a very specific schedule. So, during the hours the seal is broken, he is free to roam as he likes, which Julian finds to be a very peculiar way to run a dungeon. In reality, every aspect of this high-security Wing 2 is a world apart from the chaos of Wing 1. Meanwhile, in a distant kingdom, a nobleman in a gold-trimmed carriage mentions an injury, though his companion shrugs it off as nothing. He claims it was just a minor skirmish from a while ago, and the other man agrees, thinking the boy is still too green to fight. Still, for a nameless squire, being called there makes the man ask if the boy truly understands what that means. Sir Alistair never expected his grand lord to come in person, but the truth is that the boy, Julian, the young man they had been discussing, had finally caught the sovereign's attention. He wanted to see the kid for himself. Just hearing Julian's name makes Alistair remember the mountain of trouble the boy has caused lately. He thought the kid was just a lunatic, but then he realized something. Most of the knights Julian fought were members of the Dragon Guard. Regarding the intel he just spilled, Alistair explains that he intercepted a private message intended for the warden during a secret meeting. He heard a message saying, "I am coming for your son," revealing that Julian's father is actually Duke Garrick. And trust me, he is second in command of the House of the Dragon.